Welcome to Fanfiction Audiobooks. Marvel Comics, starting with the ability to replicate superhuman talents. Chapter 1 Rebirth of the Second Generation Rich Brother. Small town in Kansas. A huge billboard stands in front of the endless cornfield, with the words "Welcome to the creamed corn capital of the world" written on it. Zooming out further, a helicopter flew crookedly over the cornfield, causing gusts of wind and waves to blow the corn stalks. This is a small helicopter, and there is a blond man sitting in the cabin, holding a newspaper and browsing information. As if being moved by the strong wind howling outside the window, the man put down the newspaper and looked at the seat behind him. Two blond boys were sitting in the cabin, one on the left and the other on the right. The cute younger boy was lowering his head and peeling an apple with a fruit knife, which was in sharp contrast to the nervous brother with his eyes closed next to him. When the man witnessed this scene, he became more and more dissatisfied with his eldest son's performance. Compared with his younger son, who was so smart and mature since he was a child, his eldest son was as timid as a real child. The man pursed his thin lips and scolded, "Lex, open your eyes." "But father, I'm afraid." Young Lex Luthor bit his lip. If you look carefully, the boy's lips have begun to tremble. Negative emotions from Lex Luthor +1. Congratulations, you have obtained 10,000 points of negative emotions from Lex Luthor, and have redeemed one copy of the talent. This voice sounded in the mind of the young child next to Lex. His name was Gino Luthor. He was a miserable college student in the 21st century who had graduated and was unemployed. He seemed to have been punished and cursed by the fairy godmother. He choked to death while drinking Coke, and his soul traveled to the DC universe, becoming the younger brother of the future bald and ruthless Emperor Lex Luthor. Who is Lex Luthor? One of the smartest human beings in DC, a super rich man who can compare with Bruce Wayne in terms of financial resources. He is as rich as a country and a technology tycoon. It is not an exaggeration to throw any of the advantages of a high-quality man into Luthor in the future. As the younger brother of future boss Lex Luthor, and a buff born into the rich second generation, Gino can be said to have been born at the end of his life. And Gino is a realistic person. He has neither genius-like wisdom nor extraordinary force. Salted fish should have the consciousness of salted fish. Therefore, Gino's plan at the beginning was very simple. He would spend his whole life eating and drinking until he could get away with it, which was called lay down for short. However, on the second day after he could speak, a plug-in named system appeared in his mind. To put it simply, Gino's system can collect the negative emotions of superheroes and supervillains in this universe to exchange for the ability to copy talents, but the upper limit of each person is 10,000 negative points. This gives Gino another possibility in his life, which is to copy the abilities of superheroes or supervillains in this world and become stronger. Brother Cheap is such a good guy. Gino felt a little emotional that all his 10,000 negative points were contributed by his brother. It's also thanks to the fact that the two of them grew up and started snatching Luthor's breasts. When being chased by a dog, he left Lex behind and ran away alone to wait for the afterlife scene of Brothers and Brothers. Gino spared his living expenses and finally gained 10,000 points at the age of 5, possessing the ability to copy his talent for once. After coming back to his senses, Gino sighed and took his brother's little arm. "Okay, Lex, don't be afraid, I'm here." This small gesture gave Lex some courage. He slowly opened his eyes and looked at Gino with a complicated expression. Growing up, he would always be compared with his younger brother by his father. For example, his younger brother cared about his parents, and even small things like bringing them breakfast would be used by his father as a weapon to attack Lex. Although his grades were better than Gino's, he couldn't bear the opponent's emotional intelligence to crush him. The only thing he could do well at home was that he was older than Gino. "Okay, stop arguing. Look at the town below. Isn't it beautiful?" Lionel was upset by the noise. Dad interrupted the argument between the two, and Lex held Gino's little hand with his backhand, looking fearfully at the field scenery outside the plane. Looking at the town's chimneys, beautiful asphalt roads, and vaguely visible tractors, these scenes that could not be seen in the city made Lex cheer for joy. "It's really beautiful. To be honest, this kind of view is not common in the metropolis." The roaring helicopter landed. Lex, who was wilting on the helicopter, immediately regained his energy and jumped out of the helicopter first. He raised his head and stared at Gino with provocative eyes as if he had won a victory. "Look, I got off the helicopter before you." Children's comparison mood is always inexplicable. Gino ignored Lex's provocation and followed his father out of the helicopter. "As soon as I got off the plane, several factory employees gathered around and asked Dad to process the documents. It's business again, so boring. Lex pouted, then grabbed Jino, who was standing in a daze, and pointed to the rice field not far away. Let's go over there and have a look. I think I saw a good one. Big bird. On a wooden stake at the entrance of the field, a bird with dark feathers tilted its head and looked at the two of them. Jino sighed. That's Raven, stupid Lex. Stop talking nonsense and come with me. Lex grabbed Jino's arm, and the two little crows chased the crow into the tall corn forest. Smelling the fragrance of the earth, Lex was extremely curious about everything in the country town. Wait, did you hear anything? Jino tilted his head. At this moment, the two of them were already walking deep in the corn forest. The tall stalks around them blocked their sight. Coupled with the dark environment, Lex couldn't help but swallowed. Gee, Jino, don't scare me. Jino sighed. Listen carefully, my foolish brother. Lex paused and listened. Help me. Please, help me. A vague whisper echoed in their ears, like a strange invisible ghost. Fa, what happened? Lex squeezed Jino's arm again and swallowed nervously. The sound seems to be coming from over there. Jino looked up to the right and stepped towards the direction of the sound. Wait a minute. Don't run around. What if there is really a ghost? Lex looked at Jino, who was leaving. Worried about his little brother's safety, he gritted his teeth and chased after Jino. The two walked through the wet soil and pushed aside corn stalks, and finally found the source of the sound. That's a person. Lex asked in surprise. In the corn forest, a naked young man was tied to a wooden cross with a rope. A big S was painted on his chest with red paint. His black hair was wet with sweat and stuck to both sides of his cheeks. Seeing the two of them, the man's eyes lit up and he said, Please, help me. Chapter 2 Accompany you to watch the meteor shower. Chapter 2 Accompany you to watch the meteor shower. Why are you tied to the cross? Let's put him down. The two spoke in tandem. Lex quickly grabbed Jino and said, Wait a minute, Jino, maybe this guy is some kind of bad guy who is tied to this cross. Jino moved slightly, then followed Lex and stood in front of the man. He put away the knife in his hand, stared at the young man and said, Tell me, why are you tied here? The man hung his head weakly and said in a weak and low voice, This is bullying. Campus bullying at the local school's high school graduation prom. They will select the guy who is least popular in the school to take on the role of scarecrow. A whole day and night. When he said the last sentence, the man's tone already had a hint of gritted teeth. A school bullying. Kino sighed a little. The man in front of him was thin and elegant, and he completely fit the image of a nerd who was bullied in an American high school. Let's put him down. Just as Jino was about to cut the rope, he heard Lex shouting in panic, Wait! Look at the sky. Jino looked up and saw several hot streams of light streaking across the sky in the blue sky, flying towards the town with long tails. One of them is approaching the three of them at an extremely fast speed. The face of the nerdy young man changed drastically, and he saw the meteorite suddenly hit the field not far from everyone. Boom! The huge impact caused by the meteorite falling to the ground caused the soil to surge, mixed with terrifying air waves that spread out in all directions centered on the impact point of the meteorite. Lex pushed down Jino first and pressed him under him. Lie down. Jino. The next second, air waves mixed with mud suddenly fell on Lex's back, and countless mud buried their bodies. At the same time, countless meteorites fell across the town. Some meteorites fell into the streets, setting off a series of explosions and screams, smashing cars and taking away the lives of innocent people. Others fell into residents' homes, killing a family of 3 on the spot. For the small town, today is a terrible disaster. At 7 o'clock in the evening, the setting sun poured into the room through the glass and hit the white hospital bed. Jino's eyes moved slightly, and there was a strong smell of disinfectant in the air. The smell immediately made people know where they were. He is in the hospital. Jino felt relieved, fortunately he was saved. However, concern for Lex arose in my heart. Although Lex is always criticized for being timid and naive, the two grew up together, and their family relationship cannot be faked. Jino raised his eyelids with difficulty, glanced around, and soon saw the unconscious Lex on the bed beside him. After glancing at Cheap Brother's electrocardiogram and confirming that he was alive, Jino breathed a sigh of relief. As long as the person was not dead, even if he was in a vegetative state, he could save Cheap Brother as long as he gave himself time. However, This feeling of having no power and being at the mercy of natural disasters is really terrible. Jino slowly raised his head, staring at the setting sun in the distance with a faint expression. With a thought in his mind, there was an extra card in his hand that only he could see. Being familiar with the DC superhero origin story in his previous life, Kino certainly knew where these meteors and meteorites came from. Maybe he couldn't be sure when he first came to this town, but the violent meteorite rain that affected the entire town made Kilo sure that the future god on Earth, Clark Kent, had finally landed in this town. What an interesting irony that the arrival of a god among men is accompanied by destruction. Gino got out of bed and came to the cheap man in a hospital gown, while their savior was also lying on the bed next door. Gino rubbed Lex's cheek, and the next second, the cheap guy suddenly woke up. Hoo-ho, where are we? Lex opened his eyes. He was breathing rapidly and looking at the surrounding environment with a horrified look on his face. It was obvious that he had not yet recovered from the meteorite explosion. Gino reluctantly slapped Lex on the cheek. Wake up, Lex, we are in the hospital, we have been rescued. After Gino's explanation, Lex realized that he was lying on the hospital bed. Damn it! Lex muttered, then glanced at the ward and said, Where's Dad? Gino shrugged, Go and do business. Their father, Lionel Luthor, was a shrewd businessman, an extremely wealthy man, and one of the most successful businessmen in free America. Anyone who met him had to be courteous to him. He gave almost all his money to him. Time is spent creating wealth, and naturally alienated from family companionship. Haha, he is never satisfied with his wealth, he always wants more, like a greedy vampire. A trace of anger appeared on Lex's face. With his two sons lying in the hospital, he was still thinking about business. Kino, are you feeling uncomfortable? Lex decided not to think about Lionel anymore, so he looked at Kino and asked. Gino waved his hand, I'm fine. But the guy tied to the cross is unlucky. Gino pointed to the clinically comatose young man. Even though he was wearing a hospital gown, you could still see the S-shaped red paint on the guy's chest. Lex sneered, Ha, if it weren't for him, maybe the meteorite wouldn't have affected us. Just when Lex was about to speak, the door opened and his father, Lionel, walked into the ward. When he saw Gino and Lex waking up, the man was obviously relieved. Oh, thank God, you are okay. Yes, Dad, except for the moment we opened our eyes and found that you were not around, we were still very happy. Lex commented with a sneer. Lex was very unfazed by the cheap dad who loved money more than his son. Listening to Lex's weird words, Lionel frowned and reprimanded, Hey, don't blame me. I plan to build a fertilizer processing plant here, which will bring us the Luthor family a lot of profits. So how did things go? Father. Kilo quickly interrupted the conversation. If Lex was allowed to say a few more words, the angry cheap daddy would beat up the cheap guy. Hearing Kilo's inquiry, the man rubbed his forehead in annoyance and complained, Humph, things went smoothly, except for the fact that a farmer outside the town refused to agree to sell their land. That's why I'm here. I'm going to offer them a price they can't refuse and let them accept it. Kilo became interested and asked curiously, which couple is so stubborn? Could it be the Kent family? Cheap Daddy thought about it for a while, frowned and said, they seem to be called Jonathan Kent and Martha Kent. Gino was not surprised when he heard these two names. Only Jonathan and his wife could reject the huge acquisition proposal. Chapter 3 What's yours is mine. The black car sped along the country road and ambulances and fire trucks passed by from time to time. The town that was baptized by the meteorite was full of devastation and disaster. Today was destined to be a disastrous day for the town. Gino was sitting in the back seat of the car. Through the window, he could see many families driving away from the town. The car drove through the field where Kino had been before, and the towering corn forest was flattened by the impact of the meteorite explosion. Even if the town is in chaos now, it can't stop Lionel's heart of making money. Seriously, why don't we stay in the hospital instead of following this vampire? Lex complained in Gino's ear, showing a filial son's temperament since he was a child. Just a few minutes ago, when Lionel said the names of the Kents, Gino had insisted on going with them. Come on, he bought you the expensive suit you're wearing. Gino pointed at Lex's suit, which made the other person fall into depression again and make a face. Boss, we're here. The driver parked the car firmly and looked out the window, which was a slightly old farm. Who would live in a place like this? Lex looked at the farm that was about to collapse with disdain. So this is why I told you to work hard. Lionel sneered, opened the door and walked out of the car. Gino silently opened the door and got out of the car. Oh my gosh, I got a puddle of poop in my shoe. As soon as he got out of the car, Lex was unlucky enough to step on a puddle of bird droppings on the edge of the road. Gino walked past Lex and taunted with a smile, "Good luck as always, Lex. Set your sights on this farm." The entrance door was chained, making it look as if the owner of the house was not at home. Our trip was in vain. This wasted my time. Lionel, a shrewd businessman, was a little upset. He smelled the smell of poultry feces in the air. The man couldn't help turning his head and scolding Lex, "Damn it, Lex. Throw away those shoes. Stop rubbing them around." Lex was a little embarrassed and took off his shoes and threw them in the field, and was scolded by his father in front of Gino. This made Lex even more embarrassed and ran to the car with a dark face. "Father, we seem to have arrived at that family." Gino pointed out something, standing on tiptoes and pointing at the two figures in the distance. They were a young couple. The man's face was full of dullness and simplicity. He was an honest man who could be recognized from the crowd at a glance, giving people a sense of calmness and reliability. At this moment, his wife seemed to be saying something next to the man. The man nodded with a smile, but it could be seen from the worried eyes that he was not in a good mood. As for his wife, she had beautiful blonde hair. Her arms were tightly hugging the coat on her chest. There seemed to be something hidden inside, which made her look at the coat on her chest frequently. "Thank God, it's finally here." Lionel breathed a sigh of relief and walked towards the couple. He blocked their way, took out the account book from his pocket and said, "Hey, you two, I am Lionel Luther, chairman of Luther Group." Lionel waved the banknote towards Jonathan and said, "Let's get right to the point. How much do you want, and I'll give you a price you can't refuse for this farm." "Wait, Martha and I." Before Jonathan could finish his words, he was pulled aside by Lionel to talk about the price. In Lionel's view, there was nothing that money couldn't buy. Martha, a young wife, looked worriedly at Lionel, who was negotiating with her husband. In her opinion, the Luther Group was a behemoth that they could not afford to offend. With her husband's stubborn character, it was very likely that he would have an affair with Lionel. Conflict. Just when Martha was worried, she felt her trouser leg being gently tugged. The woman lowered her head and saw a sculpted little boy looking at her with his head raised. "Beautiful sister, what are you holding in your arms?" The cunning Kino made full use of his cute appearance and eloquent mouth to ask Martha. Looking at the cute boy, Martha looked down at the boy she picked up on the roadside, smiled and said, "It's my adopted child. Baby." Gino showed an eager expression, "Can I see him?" This Martha wanted to refuse, but when she met Kino's pitiful expression, Martha sighed, knelt down and showed the baby wrapped in swaddling clothes to Kino. "He's so cute." Gino stared at the baby wrapped in the coat. He had short black hair and a peaceful sleeping face. The baby's pink and white skin can inspire a woman's maternal nature. It's no wonder that Martha insisted on keeping the young baby. "Clark? Can I touch his hair?" Martha pursed her lips, "Okay, but be gentle, he is sleeping." "Of course." Gino nodded seriously and pointed to the black car behind him, "I often coax my brother to sleep. I have experience in this area." Martha raised her head and glanced at Lex, who had a dark face in the car and didn't know that he was a younger brother. Then she felt relieved and handed the swaddle in her hand to Gino. Gino stared at Clark, and then stretched out two fingers. Invisible to outsiders, there was a card emitting golden light between his two fingers. The finger slowly stretched out towards Clark, and the moment the index finger touched Clark's forehead, the golden card turned into a stream of gold powder and sprinkled on the young Clark's body. "Contact Clark Kent and have copied the talent." The cold voice of the system sounded in my mind. Gino was a little confused. To be honest, he didn't feel any strange feeling. It was as calm and unchanged as breathing. Except for the setting sun hitting my body, which makes my body feel indescribably comfortable. Isn't this system fake? Gino looked strange. He wanted to know if the system had a complaint channel. He wanted to complain to the system. While Gino was thinking, not far away, Jonathan and Lionel also had a fierce quarrel. "I'm sorry, Lionel, I won't sell my farm for any money, I love it here, it's an integral part of who I am." Lionel turned his head angrily, "It's up to you, you stubborn idiot." "Kino, let's go." Gino glanced at the furious father, smiled apologetically at the worried Martha, then turned around and left with Lionel. Sitting in the car, Lionel was obviously furious. And he complained wildly about Jonathan's stubbornness and stupidity along the way. Gino was also a little unhappy. Touching the knife in his pocket, he was a little unsure whether he had obtained superhuman abilities. If he had really succeeded, why was there no change? Gino subconsciously clenched his fists. Click! A crisp sound rang in his pocket. Gino glanced down at his pocket and found that the sharp fruit knife in his palm had long been twisted into a ball of twisted iron and scrapped. Chapter 4 Return to the town. 13 years later. In a small town in Kansas, billboards that were originally destroyed by meteorites were once again erected in the woods, with the familiar words "Buttered Corn Capital of the World" written on them. Buzz! A roaring sports car skitters past the billboard, kicking up clouds of dust and drifting beautifully through the bend. The roaring engine drove the sports car speeding through the fields, crossing the creek, and finally stopped suddenly in front of a quaint castle that occupied a large area. Two young men stepped out of the sports car. The young man driving the car had blonde hair, a handsome and angular face, brown-black eyes like eagle eyes, a high nose and slightly thin lips. This is undoubtedly a handsome and perfect man, and the expensive suit makes him look even more handsome. He is like a perfectly handsome prince in the Middle Ages. Unfortunately, the princess sitting in the passenger seat is a bald young man. The other one with a smooth and round bald head is Lex Luthor. Well, although he avoided the baldness caused by the meteorite impact, in more than 10 years of study, Luthor, who was too smart, still lost all his hair and became a bald young man. Gino tilted his head and looked at the castle in front of him with some emotion. Wow, it really looks like a medieval castle as you said, exuding the aura of history. Lex sneered, you want to say it's old, right? Lex waved to the butler who was guarding the door, and soon someone came and drove away the car. The old butler opened the main door of the castle, with a decent smile on his face, and welcomed the owner of the castle to the castle. The two of them walked along the tree-lined path, smelling the fresh air in the countryside, which made people feel much better. Lex looked at his brother with rich blonde hair and said angrily, "Congratulations, you were exiled to a small town by that vampire with me." Gino shrugged. "I just hope this ghost castle isn't haunted." Lex glanced at Gino's strong figure. Others may not know it, but he knew the terrifying power contained in his brother's body. If the two of them really encountered a monster like a zombie, it would only be the latter who would run away. "Come with me, I've prepared a gift for you." Lex took Gino to the lawn behind the castle. There was a silver-white sports car parked on the large grass. Lex knocked on the body. The Bugatti EB110 Super Sport uses a quad-turbo V12 supercharged engine and can reach a speed of 216 miles per hour. Congratulations on officially entering high school life. With that said, Lex threw the key in his hand to Gino. "Come, Lex." Gino reluctantly took the key. "You don't really agree with Dad's stupid idea of letting me go to high school or something, do you? Education is very important. Also, you should call me brother." Lex grinned and looked at Gino's deflated expression. Not to mention how happy he was in his heart, the man snapped his fingers. "Anyway, if you choose to resist going to school, I will truthfully tell your mother these things. You don't want her to fly from the metropolis to come to you, right?" Listening to Lex's words, Gino suddenly pictured his mother using a gentle tone while reaching out to pinch his ears. The young man reluctantly raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Okay, I will go to school." Gino has a very open view on life. Since you can't resist, then accept him. Moreover, if you remember correctly, the famous Mr. Clark seems to have also gone to high school in the small town. Clark's high school career was very troubled, and he didn't have to worry about negative points when he went to school. During these 13 years, he also figured out according to the rules of the system, the upper limit of points obtained by a superhero or supervillain is 10,000 points. Therefore, if you want to use points to exchange for more items, you need to constantly exchange them with new heroes and villains. Lex was going to inspect the family's factory in a small town next. Before leaving, he told Gino to report to school today. Oh, high school life. Gino looked up at the blue sky, and subconsciously thought of the miserable high school career in his previous life of 1996. Even if he tried his best, he could only get a miserable college diploma under the wave of involution. But now, everything has passed. Gino looked at the sun with a smile. The gentle sunlight hitting his body constantly nourished Gino's body. He could feel his blood boiling and roaring. The terrifying power contained in this body was enough to make the world tremble. Jino slowly raised his powerful arm that seemed to be made of steel alloy, and then opened his palm. Hold gently. Bang! The terrifying power caused the air in his palm to explode with a sonic explosion, truly detonating the air. In this life, I will never live such a useless life. I will embrace all the beautiful things in life. With an indifferent expression, Jino took off his black suit, revealing his white shirt. He opened the car door and got in. High school life. The young man smiled indifferently and said slowly amidst the roar of the sports car, I'm coming. The Bugatti sports car roared out of the manor and headed towards the town. While driving, with wind and waves blowing on both sides of the car, Jino thought about his abilities. 13 years have passed since he copied Clark's talent. He found that the talent copied by the system was the same as that of young Clark, which was gradually awakened over time, such as the steel body and super strength that could easily break a knife at the beginning. I don't know when I can awaken my heat vision. Jino turned the steering wheel, and the sports car turned onto a more open country dirt road. After turning a corner again, a yellow-brown school bus appeared in front of the car window, and Jino realized that his route to school happened to coincide with the school bus. Wait, that farm. Jino frowned and looked at the farm in the distance. Isn't this the farm of Mr. and Mrs. Jonathan? It was here that I copied Clark's talent when I was a child. Just as he was thinking this, Jino saw a figure walking out of the red house on the farm. The figure was carrying a red canvas bag, had rich black curly hair, and a tall and powerful figure. However, the old jacket he was wearing looked a bit rustic. The other party stared at the school bus in the distance, lowering his head in a little loss. Reap Clark Kent's negative emotion +1, +1. Here comes the big gift package. Jino glanced at Clark who was standing at the gate of the farm. The next second, the young man slammed on the brakes, and the sports car stopped in front of Clark with a beautiful flick. Jino coquettishly took off the sunglasses on his face, lowered his head and stared at the young boy and said, Hey, friend, do you want a ride? Clark looked in surprise as the cool silver sports car and the cool blonde young man suddenly appeared in front of him. Hello, but I don't think I need it. He was going to say that he ran to school, but before Clark could finish his words, he was interrupted by Jino. The young man shrugged with an exaggerated expression, Please, you are also a high school student, right? I just came to this school today and am preparing to register. Jino pointed to the school bus that was gradually disappearing. Do you want to walk to the school a few kilometers away? Readers who asked why the protagonist went to high school, if you are confused, skip to chapter 20 to read the reason. Xiao Mo originally planned to use this incident as a trap to lead to major events in the magical world in the future, but there were too many readers asking, so it can be regarded as the plot here. Thoroughly. Chapter 5 Let me show you how cool you are. This is the first time Clark meets Jino. The young man sitting in the driver's seat put one hand on the door of the sports car and the other on the steering wheel. His long fingers tapped the steering wheel rhythmically to the music in the car. The young man said to Clark with a strong attitude, There is no time to waste, get in the car and follow me, you stupid guy. Let's catch up with the school bus in front of us. Clark sighed. He originally planned to use super speed to take a shortcut to run to school, but this sports car boy suddenly broke into his life like a visitor from outside. The desire for the limelight during the rebellious period was combined with the influence of Jino's words. Somehow, Clark stretched out his arm to open the door and sat in the passenger seat of the sports car. Who can refuse to experience the temptation of a sports car? Not to mention the innocent big boy Clark. That's right, big boy, fasten your seat belt. Jino looked forward, twisted his neck and said coolly, the next step will be very soon. Press the clutch and engage the gear, then release the brake and tap the accelerator. The originally calm sports car suddenly emits an ear-splitting roar, and instantly turns into an afterimage and flutters towards the road ahead. The wheels run over the dirt, and the Bugatti sports car shoots out like an arrow from a string, chasing towards the school bus. Amidst the strong wind, Kino operated the steering wheel with one hand, and the sports car swung through the curve in a beautiful arc, shouting to Clark, This is cool, isn't it? The wind roared in his ears, and the roar of the sports car ignited the man's blood. Even Clark, who had been restraining himself, felt the urge to cheer loudly at this moment. Although he could easily catch up with the sports car with his own speed, sitting in the sports car was a different experience. He nodded heavily and responded loudly, Your driving skills are so good. Ah, this is nothing. Jino's expression was calm. As the sports car continued to accelerate, the two of them could already see the school bus. Gino grinned and said harshly, "Let's make the game more exciting." Having said that, Kino stepped on the accelerator again, and the sports car roared straight towards the school bus's tail lights. "Wait! What are you doing?" Clark's expression changed drastically as he saw the sports car rushing towards the school bus at extremely fast speeds. 300 meters, 200 meters. The engine roared, the car body roared, and the tires made a rustling sound as they rolled over the dirt. The car is about to crash. Clark held the car door tightly, he wanted to jump out to prevent this tragedy. And Gino's ears were constantly ringing with negative emotions from Clark. Just when Clark was about to jump out of the sports car to stop the impending car accident, Kino suddenly turned the steering wheel and pulled the handbrake. The smoothly speeding sports car suddenly swerved, and the huge inertia almost threw Clark away. The sunny boy couldn't help but hold on to the car door, while nervously watching the sports car pass the school bus with a professional drainage ditch bend move. The tires squeal. The sports car passed the school bus with a brisk, fast and elegant drift and easily completed the overtaking. This is due to the fact that Lionel invited the world's top racing drivers to train Kino when he was very young. His driving skills are great. On the school bus, the driver's face turned green with anger. He stared at the arrogant sports car passing the school bus he was driving, and was overtaken by the other party with a drifting movement. For a man, this was a silent provocation. The uncle driver was very angry and thought that if he had been there 20 years in the morning, he would be able to do racing and drifting. How can it be the younger generation's turn to be so arrogant? The uncle driver muttered and complained. Today's young people really don't respect martial ethics and have no idea of respecting the elderly and caring for the young. The students in the car also exclaimed, but for these guys with strong hormones, this behavior is simply cool. In the back seat of the school bus, a black boy rubbed his eyes in disbelief, looked at the co-pilot of the sports car, and said in a strange tone, "Wait a minute, Chloe, that co-pilot seems to be Clark." "What?" The girl with short blonde hair bit her lip. Her name was Chloe, and she was one of Clark's few friends on campus. She looked at the familiar brown jacket and red school bag in surprise, rolled her eyes at the black man Pete next to her, and said, "That doesn't look like that, or it's Clark." "Shit," the black boy pouted his thick lips and said with complicated emotions, "I never knew that our farm boy actually has a friend who drives a sports car. We have never seen that guy in school." The girl flipped her short blonde hair and said, "That man seems very young? Maybe he is a transfer student or something. Do you think I have a chance to invite him to the prom?" Peter shrugged and said, "I didn't see that guy's face clearly, but if he's handsome, maybe you don't have a chance. Those enthusiastic cheerleading girls are going to eat him alive. Not your turn, Chloe, we're the school freak trio, aren't we? It doesn't matter if he has money, if he is tall and handsome, believe me. He will easily replace Whitney as the school's well-deserved campus hero. He can invite any cute girl to his house to play poker. Because no girl would reject such a perfect man." Little Black Pete rubbed his cheek and said, "If I were a woman, I would also love him to death." Outside the school bus, the sports car on the other side resumed driving smoothly. Gino raised his right hand and gave a thumbs up to the school bus behind him, then stepped on the accelerator and drove away amidst the driver's angry scolding. "Oh my God, you're crazy!" The frightened Clark pursed his lips, which was a sign of his anger. "Your behavior is completely irresponsible for life, and it is also a disregard for your own life." Clark kept preaching, and while Gino was harvesting Clark's negative emotions, he pretended to listen attentively, with a look of approval on his face. He nodded and said, "You are right, I won't do it next time." Hearing Gino's words, Clark couldn't help but be slightly startled and looked at Gino with some suspicion. And when the boy took off his sunglasses and revealed his sincere eyes, Clark was silent for a moment and decided to believe Gino. Maybe this new classmate was just spoiled by his family because he was too rich? Kind-hearted Clark always likes to believe in others. Here we are. While Clark was thinking, the sports car slowly parked in a parking space outside the campus. Gino pulled out the car key, patted Clark on the shoulder, took out a box of chewing gum from his pocket, and gestured to Clark to take one. "Let me meet you, my name is Gino Luther." Clark politely took away a stick of chewing gum, and then stared at Gino with some surprise. "Luther? The Luther family of the small-town chemical plant?" "Ah, yes, if there is no second Luther family in this town, I will be the Luther." Gino raised his eyebrows and winked at Clark, extending his right hand to show friendship. Clark pursed his lips. Although Gino's behavior just now was a bit crazy, fortunately it did not cause a big disaster. After thinking about it, he still took the right hand handed over by Gino and said seriously, "My name is Clark Kent." Chapter 6 The Popular Transfer Student. The school bus soon stopped at the gate of the campus. The students got off the school bus one after another. The eyes of many students were immediately attracted by the silver-white Bugatti sports car. After all, among the crowd of vintage pickup trucks, Gino's Bugatti sports car seems to stand out from the crowd and attracts the attention of high school students. What makes many girls even more crazy is the figure standing next to the sports car. Long blonde hair, tall figure, and handsome appearance. Gino's slender fingers rested on shy Clark's shoulders, his irreverent smile and unbridled movements, as well as the looming outline of perfect abdominal muscles under the white shirt, all made many restless girls in adolescence excited, and they could only feel their heartbeats and blood pressure increasing. Soaring. Years of sunshine and wealth have created Gino's perfect temperament, handsome appearance, and flamboyant self-confidence, which is undoubtedly a walking weapon to kill girls. Seeing many students casting their gazes in this direction, Clark, who had never received such huge attention, was at a loss for a moment. He was held around the neck by Gino like a puppet on strings and walked towards the campus. Isn't this a good feeling? Clark and Gino walked into the campus with their arms around each other and their heads lowered. At the same time, they did not forget to peek out of the corner of their eyes at the goddess Lana Blue, who was also looking at them. Although this new classmate is a little arrogant in his actions, on American campuses, boys who can hang out with cool kids will also be recognized as cool kids. This feeling of being noticed greatly satisfies young Clark's restless heart. Self-esteem. He feels great now. On the other side of the duo, Peter glanced at his best friend Chloe and said with some regret, "It seems that I guessed the worst plan. This sports car boy is so handsome." Chloe sighed, took out a $5 knife from her pocket and handed it to little Nico. "You won the bet." She has now seen many girls who think they are beautiful, purposely passing by Gino and Clark in groups, deliberately laughing to attract the attention of the handsome blonde man. "It seems I have no chance." Chloe sighed, but quickly adjusted herself, and asked her companion Pete enthusiastically, "Do you think if you invite him to join the campus daily club, will it attract more people?" Talent joining. Peter glanced at Chloe. "How could you ask such a stupid question? This new classmate has become a popular star in the school, and the girls' eyes are almost wet when they look at him. What you need to think about is how to get this blonde boy to join your newspaper." Chloe nodded in agreement. Looking at the conversation with Gino, the somewhat shy Clark said, "Maybe we can ask Clark for help. The blonde boy seems to have a good attitude towards Clark." So, Chloe took action immediately. "Hey, Clark!" The girl ran to the two older boys and blocked the way. She glanced at Gino and said, "I didn't expect you to make good friends so quickly." Clark rubbed his nose in embarrassment. "Hey, Chloe, this is Gino, Gino Luther." Gino interrupted Clark's introduction and smiled at the girl. The two of them were considered acquaintances. "It turns out to be the Luther family." Chloe said it should be like this expression. If it was the Luther family, then it wouldn't be strange to be able to drive a sports car. "Oh, shit, man, you have a Bugatti sports car." Little Nico Pete also ran over and greeted Gino. "You are the new freshman, right?" Gino smiled and nodded. "Yes, my brother and I came to the small town from the metropolis. I have to say, your place is much better than the big city. The air quality in that damn place is terrible." In just one sentence, Gino narrowed the distance between him and Clark by praising their hometown. All three of them had proud expressions on their faces. While a few people were talking, Lana Blue, not far away, was also watching what was going on here. The girl's eyes fell on Gino's face, and she always felt that she had seen this guy somewhere when she was a child. "Lana, honey, what are you looking at?" Lana's boyfriend, the captain of the football team, a tall blonde young man named Whitney, noticed his girlfriend's gaze. He followed his girlfriend's gaze and saw Gino with a wicked smile on his face, chatting and laughing with the trio of campus geeks. Suddenly, the jealousy in Whitney's heart was overturned. It seemed that his girlfriend was attracted by Gino. "Ha, this guy is the sports car kid from the morning. He has become a famous figure on campus." Whitney said in her girlfriend's ear in a sinister tone, "That lunatic almost hit our school bus." Whitney frantically fanned the flames in her girlfriend's ears. trying to lower her favorability towards Gino. Hey? Oh, yes, that guy is a little crazy. Lana came back to her senses and smiled gently at her boyfriend. I just think that the transfer student looks a bit like a boy I met when I was a child, but maybe I made a mistake. Let's go, it's time to go to class. Lana picked up her school bag and walked towards the classroom. With a gloomy expression, Whitney glanced at her girlfriend who turned to leave, and then glanced at Gino, who was looking arrogantly. The other party was also staring at the back of his girlfriend Lana as she left. The look of her arrogant attitude immediately reminded Whitney of there are many NTR plots. Before entering the campus, he heard many classmates talking about this boy, saying that this guy was expected to become the new school president. As the former school president, Whitney was naturally unhappy with these words. Coupled with the previous misunderstanding, Whitney only felt a fire burning in her chest. Suddenly thinking of the project candidates finalized by the football team, Whitney's lips curved into a sneer. Just wait, blonde boy. That list should be changed. Gino didn't know that he was on the blacklist of his former school boss. His eyes were locked on Lana, who walked into the classroom. Ever since he first stepped into the campus, he had felt an uncomfortable feeling from the girl, like a fish out of water or a traveler with a cold, which made Gino feel uncomfortable. I have to figure out what's weird about this girl. Gino secretly remembered it in his heart. Glancing down at the time on his watch, Gino said goodbye to the three of them. Okay, guys, I'll report to the principal's office first. We'll see you after class. Gino said goodbye to the three of them, turned around and walked towards the teaching building. Gino came to the principal's office. The vice principal of the small town high school was a middle-aged Asian man. There was a small golden plaque on his desk with Mr. Guan written on it. Hello, Mr. Gino Luther. The middle-aged Asian man stood up with a smile to greet Gino. Welcome to our high school. Gino smiled and nodded. I'm also looking forward to the rest of my high school life. Regarding kryptonite, I can give readers a hint. It depends on whether you can guess how the protagonist will easily solve the influence of kryptonite. 1. Lex and Gino have been collecting the bodies of those kryptonite reformers. 2. Lex witnessed Clark's powerful ability and knew Kino's comments about Clark. 3. Lex is a genius scientist. 4. In the comics, Lex once created, to fight the crime syndicate. Xiao Mo has many ways to write the protagonist to use his talent system to easily solve the influence of kryptonite. Those who read my introduction carefully should be able to see that the protagonist's talent to be copied again in the later period is Superman template plus XXX template equals XXX Superman. So, kryptonite is nothing? Chapter 7 Threaten Me? Jingle bell. The bell echoed throughout the campus. In the corridor, several long-legged girls stopped Kino. The leading white girl deliberately rolled up her shirt, exposing her flat belly, and stared at Kino with her head tilted. So, do you have time tonight? The other two wingmen followed suit and said, we have a great party. Yes, I hope you can participate. Gino looked at the young girls in front of him, smiled, leaned down, pinched the cheek of the leading girl, and chuckled. I'm sorry, my brother and I have to clean up the castle tonight, so we may not have time. But when the castle is clean, I will invite everyone to the castle dance. The three girls were stunned for a moment, then screamed, you mean Luther Castle? Is that your family's? Oh my god! The girls are obviously shocked that Kino owns an old castle. He's really good at flirting with girls. In the corridor, Chloe said with emotion, with that face, no girl will reject him. If it were you, it would be harassment. Peter on the side said with some excitement, I just care about the party he mentioned. If he invites me, I will have a big meal at the dance. What are you talking about? Clark suddenly appeared behind the two of them. Oh, my god! Chloe and Peter were both startled by Clark's sudden appearance. The two turned around and stared at Clark angrily. What the hell? Before the two of them could recover, Gino's voice suddenly sounded from behind them. This was a second fright, and Peter showed an expression that was uglier than crying. Why do you all like to appear behind others silently? Chloe quickly came to her senses and signaled Clark to take action with her eyes. Meeting Chloe's gaze, Clark was slightly startled, but then he thought of the girls' arrangements for him in class, so Clark scratched his head and said, Kino, are you interested in joining the campus newspaper? Campus newspaper? Gino frowned. After looking at Clark, the young man grinned, of course, why not, I'm also quite interested in the campus newspaper. Of course, this is all bullshit. Gino, who has been reborn, is only interested in becoming stronger and finding girls who are difficult to seduce. The reason why he agreed to join the newspaper is to get more points from Clark. Chloe on the side suddenly beamed with joy. She didn't expect this blonde transfer student to agree so readily, and even Peter didn't expect it. Chloe cleared her throat and was about to say something to Gino when the cell phone in the boy's pocket rang. Sorry, let me answer the phone. Gino raised his eyebrows, showed an apologetic expression to several people, and then walked away to pick up the phone. There was an unfamiliar number on the screen. When Gino answered the call, he heard a slightly green male voice. Hello, Gino Luther. Jerome. Gino's super memory immediately made him recognize the voice on the other end of the phone. He had seen the other person in the corn forest before. But at that time, I was planning to save the unlucky guy, but the meteorite struck, and in the end I had no choice but to let Genema hang on the cross to face the meteorite bombardment. After that, this unlucky guy became a vegetative and lay in a coma in the hospital for more than 10 years. Haha, I'm glad you still remember me. But now we should settle the score. The voice on the other end of the phone was cold, especially when I was hit by a meteorite. You were indifferent. When the words reached the second half, Jerome's voice already had a hint of gritted teeth. Gino frowned. Are you blaming me? I wanted to save you at that time, but I also had to consider the situation. Gino's voice gradually turned colder. I don't think I should sacrifice myself to save you. Gino has seen a lot of people like Genema, a typical moral kidnapper. As long as you don't help me, it's your fault. The other party didn't even consider that the medical expenses during his coma were advanced by the Luther family. Haha, believe me, you will regret it. Genema threatened, then hung up the phone. Gino took back his cell phone thoughtfully, and his sensitive hearing detected the whistling wind behind his head. Gino dodged it without looking back. A fist rubbed his clothes and hit the corridor wall hard. What are you doing? Gino stared expressionlessly at his attacker, a blond young man wearing a red and white rugby uniform. The opponent's face was gloomy at the moment, like a big angry bear. Gino Luther. Whitney silently retracted his arm. Although his right fist was in terrible pain, he still put on a tough guy posture and provoked Gino with his eyes. I need you to help me with something. Go be the annual scarecrow. Gino crossed his hands and said, I'm in a bad mood right now. Let's leave before I change my mind. An ordinary person without kryptonite plans to kidnap himself with superhuman abilities and become a scarecrow. This incident is as ridiculous as Lex being scolded by his father for rubbing chicken shit when he was little. Stop acting like a young man from a wealthy family. Whitney sneered and stepped forward to approach Gino. At this moment, a large number of onlookers had gathered in the corridor. Hey, what are you doing? Clark came to Gino, trying to stop the conflict. Whitney, the football captain with strong chest muscles straightened up, glanced at Clark and said, it has nothing to do with you, farm boy. He set his eyes on Gino and shouted, I'm going to teach you a lesson. After the words fell, the man clenched his fist and punched Gino's beautiful cheek with a straight fist. The crowd erupted in exclamations, and many students could already predict that Gino's nose would be bruised and his face would be swollen. Clark subconsciously took a step forward. He planned to stand in front of Gino and block the punch for him. However, to Clark's surprise, in an instant, Gino was even faster than him. He just grabbed Whitney's arm in an instant and then gently broke it. Kaka! There was a clear sound of bone cracking, and Whitney's forearm was fractured. The broken bones pierced the flesh and exposed the air, which looked particularly terrifying. But all this happens in a short moment, and can even be calculated in milliseconds. Clark looked at Gino with wide eyes. His face was full of shock, surprise, and anger. He was shocked and surprised because this was the first time in so many years that he had encountered a superhuman like himself, but he was angry because of Gino's cruelty to Whitney. The other party actually broke Whitney's arm alive. Before Clark could come back to his senses, Whitney's screams were heard in the corridor the next second. Oh, shit. My hand. He looked at his twisted arm in horror. The severe pain made the man clenched his arm and rolled on the ground. Blood spurted out from the wound on his arm and spilled onto the floor. The crowd of people watching were also shocked by this horrific scene, and they started talking about it. What happened? Oh my god, what's going on? Chapter 8 with Clark. In the eyes of the onlookers, Whitney just punched Gino suddenly, and then his arm broke without warning, spurting out a large amount of blood. Oh my god, isn't Gino a devil? A student who believed in ghosts and gods sounded horrified. But soon a girl retorted, then why can't it be God's blessing? He is so handsome, like an angel. God must not be able to stand Whitney's behavior and impose divine punishment. The crowd had different opinions and talked about Kino's performance. This new transfer student once again brought a new topic to everyone after experiencing the drag racing incident. But at this moment, a figure pushed through the crowd and broke into the fight scene. Lana looked shocked at the blood everywhere and her boyfriend's broken arm, and shouted in a panic, "Quick, call an ambulance. Did you hurt him?" Lana raised her head and glared at Gino. At the same time as the girl appeared, both Gino and Clark's faces turned extremely pale almost at the same time. Plop! Clark was the first to faint. Shit, Clark fainted and collapsed. Chloe and Peter rushed to Clark, trying to lift the unconscious Clark, and said urgently, "We need an ambulance." Gino glanced at the green necklace around the girl's neck. He moved his legs quickly to distance himself from Lana, and then the feeling of weakness all over his body left him. Damn, it's kryptonite! Gino cursed in his heart. Superman's abilities are awakened with age. In addition to possessing a body of steel, super strength, and super speed, he has not yet awakened supervision and clairvoyance ability at this stage. It was not until today that he could see Lana Blue clearly. There is a green kryptonite hanging around his neck. "I didn't do anything, ma'am." Although his face was pale, Gino still managed to smile gracefully. "Maybe you should ask everyone what your boyfriend plans to do to me." After saying this, Gino walked towards Chloe and pulled Clark up. A group of people helped the fainting Clark out of the corridor. And as the noisy corridor was gradually left behind by Gino, today was destined to be a sleepless night. "What should we do? Send him to the hospital?" In a sports car. Chloe struggled to lift Clark's shoulders. She felt like she was carrying a bull. "No, there is no need to send him to the hospital." Gino breathed out and held out 3 fingers, 3, 2, 1. As the words fell, Clark, who was originally unconscious, suddenly woke up, opened his eyes and gasped for air. Chloe and Peter on the side looked like they had seen a ghost, and they looked at Gino with a layer of awe in their eyes. "Looks like he can predict the future?" Clark, who woke up, rubbed his forehead. The boy took a few seconds to confirm his status. Then he looked at Gino with worried eyes and said seriously, "We need to talk, Gino." Clark couldn't describe how he felt now. There is excitement, hesitation, and confusion. The loneliness that had lingered around Clark for a long time seemed to disappear instantly. This was something called a sense of identity. Just like a wild wolf in captivity is still a wolf, even if it learns to flick its tail like a hound, the things imprinted in its DNA will never change. It is still essentially a wolf, just imitating a dog. Gino shrugged, "Of course." At this moment, ambulances and police cars roared outside the school gate. Gino pointed to the Bugatti sports car. "But school is not a place for chatting. Follow me." Gino left the school with Clark, and the silver-white Bugatti drove away like a silver stream of light under the dusk, leaving only a confused Chloe and Peter looking at each other. "I always feel like these two guys are a bit mysterious, right?" On a cement bridge outside the town, a silver-white sports car was parked on the side of the road. Gino and Clark stood on the bridge staring at the lake below. The golden lake illuminated by the setting sun reflected their faces. Gino had an indifferent attitude towards revealing his identity to Clark. Clark is not an ordinary person, let alone the other person who awakens his clairvoyance ability in the future. Sooner or later, he will discover abnormalities in his body. Therefore, simply get to the point and seize the initiative. Gino believes that Clark will not reveal his identity to the second person. Because he is lonely, Gino can understand this loneliness, especially under the strict tutoring of Clark's father Jonathan. The loneliness in Clark's heart will only increase day by day. Just like when the Kryptonians attacked in the future, Clark tried his best to establish communication with his compatriots. Whether they are humans or aliens, they all crave social recognition. At this moment, the atmosphere between the two was somewhat silent. Clark didn't know what to say. He wanted to ask Gino if he was in the same state as himself, but the other side was quite critical of Gino's act of breaking Whitney's arm when he disagreed. "What do you want to ask, Clark?" "I will go back to the castle to eat steak later." "Gino." Clark pursed his lips and said, "You are not a human either, right? Kino? Why is this young man still swearing? He is 100% pure human, just a Kryptonian template." But Gino can understand Clark's mentality. He nodded and said, "Yes, Clark, I am indeed not an ordinary person. This ability may be related to the meteor shower that landed in the town more than 10 years ago. Since then, I have awakened all kinds of incredible abilities." Hearing Gino's words, Clark's heart trembled. Meteor rain? That was the day I was born. Besides, you are not an ordinary person, right? Gino tilted his head and looked at Clark. A trace of bitterness appeared on the face of this innocent boy. "Yes, I am. Not even an ordinary person. But I have always tried my best to make myself ordinary." Clark straightened his chest and stared at Gino. "Since God has given us this power, we should use them correctly instead of abusing this ability." It has to be said that Jonathan's training made Clark understand the principle that with great power comes great responsibility since he was a child, so he would not have to imitate the little spider next door and sacrifice Uncle Ben. But facing Clark's serious expression, Gino stretched out a finger and waved it in front of Clark's eyes. His face was still that cynical and frivolous expression, and he only heard him say slowly, "No, Clark. I don't agree with your idea." Gino smiled and raised his head and stared at the sunset in the sky. "Saving the world, taking responsibility, and so on are too tiring. I think very clearly about my own power, and I have a basic bottom line: I will not take action against innocent ordinary people." Under the setting sun, the breeze caressed Gino's long golden hair. His tone was calm but revealed an unquestionable meaning. "However, I will use this power to protect myself, my family and my friends. Anyone who messes with me will have to bear the corresponding price." Chapter 9 and Lex. The sun sets in the sky and the moonlight covers the earth. The conversation between Gino and Clark ended unhappily. Clark insists that with great power comes great responsibility, and superpowers should limit their abilities. Gino holds the opposite attitude. He will not use his powerful force to harm innocent people, but he will ruthlessly kill enemies who threaten him. At this moment, outside the small town of Smallville, on the road near Luther Manor, the sports car turned a corner and drove into the manor. The old housekeeper has been waiting for a long time. Gino threw the keys of the sports car to the butler to park the car and walked into the castle. Gorgeous lamps hung in the huge living room. Lex shook his wine glass and sat on a chair. He raised his hand and took a sip of red wine. He looked at Gino triumphantly and said, "Chateau Lafite, pure taste. It's a pity that you are not of age and can't drink." Gino sat at his seat, with a steaming steak on the plate. The rosemary juice spread on the surface of the steak, giving it an alluring aroma. "Not being able to drink red wine doesn't make me angry, Lex. I don't like that stuff at all." Gino shook his head, holding a knife and fork to cut open the steak, putting it in his mouth to chew and taste. "By the way, there's something I have to tell you. Jerome is awake." Lex raised his eyebrows, put down the red wine glass and said, "I just wanted to tell you about this. Just this morning, Jerome, who was in the VIP ward of the metropolitan city, suddenly woke up and then disappeared instantly. After that, the entire hospital lost power for half a minute. Disappeared suddenly." Gino frowned. "You mean he has superpowers like me?" Lex put his chin on his hands and nodded, "I'm afraid so. The meteor shower many years ago created too many unknowns and accidents, as well as your terrifying abilities. This is why we came back here, brother." Gino glanced at Lex's bald head. "If we can solve the mystery of the meteorite, maybe you can regain the hair you lost." Listening to Gino's sarcasm, Lex's face darkened. "We said we weren't allowed to talk about my hair. My fault, my fault." Gino smiled and raised his hands to express surrender. When his brother was angry, he would ignore him like a little girl for several days in a row. Well, actually, from a certain point of view, Lex is a dark, disabled and arrogant boy. But Jeremy actually gained superpowers. Gino rubbed his chin, looked at Lex and said, "Lex, be careful lately. When I was at school in the afternoon, I received a threat from Jeremy." "Threat?" Lex's face looked a little ugly, and he guessed what Jeremy was thinking. Is it because of the incident 13 years ago? He thought we would die without saving him. "That's right." Gino nodded, feeling helpless about Jeremy's neurotic brain circuitry. "Master, maybe I shouldn't disturb your meal." The old butler Jarvis, wearing a tuxedo with one hand behind his back, said politely, but a group of police officers came from outside the manor and planned to ask the young master about the situation. After hearing the butler's announcement, Lex couldn't sit still and stood up. Asking about the situation. He looked at Gino. "What happened?" Was your ability exposed? At this moment, Lex has begun to think about whether he needs to hire some killers to kill all the insiders to ensure Gino's safety. Gino shook his head and said, "No, not really. I broke the bully's arm as quickly as possible. No one noticed, and the police were just confused." After hearing Gino's words, Lex regained his composure. As a relative, he knew Gino's strength, and he knew even more that the world was not ready to welcome superhumans. Lex turned to the old butler and said, "Butler, tell the police that we don't have time to cooperate with their investigation." As the eldest son of the powerful Luthor family, Lex is not afraid of the consequences of not cooperating with the police. The old butler nodded and left. After a while, he turned back and reported, "As you wish, the police have left." In a free America, capitalists have a very strong say, and the small-town police dare not offend the local tax-paying company, the Luthor Group. And this is the power of capital. The policeman left in dejection after encountering disappointment at Luthor Manor. The police car turned left and right and then came to Kent Farm, which is also Clark's home. Compared with the submissive attitude at the manor, two local policemen came directly to the door of Jonathan's house. They knocked on the wooden door roughly, "Mr. Jonathan Kent. We are small-town police. There are some matters that require your son to cooperate in the investigation." The family who were eating around the wooden table in the room looked at each other. Martha looked at Clark with some worry, subconsciously feeling that her son had caused some trouble. Jonathan signaled his wife to calm down, then glanced at Clark, who was a little panicked. He stood up, opened the door, and blocked the police with his body. "Officers, this is Jonathan Kent." "What did Clark do?" The leading police officer took out a small notebook and said, "It's an incident that happened at Smallville High School. The football captain in the same grade as your son suffered an inexplicable fracture in his arm during a fight. His arm was shattered and he will never be able to play football again. According to witnesses, the other party had a conflict with the new transfer student Gino Luthor. And your son wanted to stop the conflict and witnessed the whole process." The policeman said with an expressionless expression, "We want to know what happened." Listening to the police officer's statement, and thinking of his child's terrifying abilities, Jonathan's face became gloomy and scary. He mistakenly thought that Clark had broken Whitney's arm and left him disabled. After all, only his son has this terrifying ability. But years of education convinced Jonathan that Clark was not the person to do such a thing. For a moment, Jonathan felt a little confused. "Are you looking for me?" At this time, Clark, who heard the noise, came to Jonathan and looked at the police officer. The two police officers glanced at Clark and said, "Yes, classmate Clark, do you know how Whitney's injuries were caused?" Clark was silent for a moment and met the eyes of the two police officers. There was also the suspicious gaze of his father Jonathan. Clark was a little sad at this moment. He didn't expect that his father would suspect that he did it. Think again of the conversation he had with Gino not long ago. The words that the other party said at that time. The wolf mistakenly thought that he would be accepted by the dogs by disguising himself as a hunting dog, but the wolf is still a wolf after all. Clark was extremely shaken in his heart. After a moment of silence, Clark made up his mind. He raised his head and stared at the two police officers. "Sorry, I didn't know what happened at the time. Whitney's inexplicable fracture of her arm might be some kind of supernatural event." Chapter 10 Genima's Revenge. Kent Farm. The two policemen left the farm without a clue and interviewed several people for their confessions, but the final results were somewhat unsatisfactory. Just like Clark said, it was as if this was a supernatural event. Clark followed his father Jonathan back into the house. "What happened?" Martha, Jonathan's wife and Clark's adoptive mother, looked at the father and son worriedly. "I heard the police talking about conflicts on campus." "Clark, did you have a conflict with your classmates?" Clark shook his head. "No, not me, Mom, I didn't fight." But Jonathan seized the opportunity and said, "Then who broke Whitney's arm?" "Clark, I can see a guilty conscience from your eyes." As a son who was raised by himself, Jonathan is very familiar with Clark's micro-expressions. "Also, why do you have contact with the Luthor family?" Jonathan rubbed his forehead with a headache. "The Luthor family are all exquisite selfish and insidious guys." "Jonathan." Martha looked at her husband with some dissatisfaction. "You can't use these words to comment on a person you have never met." "No, the opposite is true." Jonathan shook his head and his eyes fell on Clark. "I met Lana's aunt when I went to the town to purchase ingredients in the afternoon. She told me about the younger son of the Luther family. She told me about the younger son of the Luther family this morning. I took Clark racing and almost hit a school bus. But it didn't hit him, father, Kino is sure of it. Clark raised his head and subconsciously retorted. He had seen Kino's terrifying reaction speed. Avoiding the school bus was as easy as breathing. Gino. Jonathan repeated his name. Your new friend's name is Gino Luther, right? Jonathan shook his head with a headache, but this behavior is undoubtedly leaving the safety of others behind. It is a crazy behavior, Clark. If you can, I want you to stay away from that guy. Even if they have never met, Jonathan can infer Kino's character based on Kino's behavior in the town, which is an extremely indifferent attitude towards strangers. He didn't want Clark to get along with such a person and be influenced into an irresponsible guy. Yet, you always teach me what to do. Clark lowered his head, impatience written on his face, and raised his fingers to criticize his father's discipline. Can't go to rugby games, can't go run. Clark raised his head a little rebelliously. I have tried very hard to be an ordinary person, father, but now do I have to comply with your wishes even if I want to make friends? Clark, that's not what I meant. Jonathan wanted to explain, but Clark didn't want to hear it. He stood up and walked up the stairs without touching the food on the plate. Jonathan. His wife Martha held Jonathan's shoulders and said in a reproachful tone, you are too tight on him. Jonathan sighed and said with a complex expression, I know, but I'm more afraid that his inability to control his abilities will be exposed to the world. Tuesday. Early morning. Gino and Lex said goodbye. One went to high school, and the other planned to inspect the Luther family's chemical plant in the town. Lex drove his bright blue sports car speeding down a country road. The billboards and bushes on both sides of the road quickly backed up from both sides of the car window. Here's a Hawazi. Lex held the steering wheel with one hand and reached into his pocket with the other hand, intending to smoke a cigarette to relax. Bang! There was an explosion not far away. Lex raised his head and saw a thin young man suddenly standing in the middle of the road, smiling strangely at him. It's time to die, Lex. The young man raised his hands, and countless electric currents instantly covered his arms. Drink! The young man let out a low roar, and the electricity as thick as a python hit the tires of the sports car. Bang! Bang! The tires burst and the sports car lost control and hit the roadside at extremely fast speeds. Oh shit! Lex turned the steering wheel hard, but the sports car was still out of control and crashed into the guardrail beside the road bridge. Wow! The iron railing, which was broken into several sections, fell into the cold and biting river together with the sports car. At the same time that Lex fell into the lake, Clark, who was driving at super speed not far away, happened to pass by this road. He witnessed a man with lightning flashing his hands blast a sports car into a lake, and then fled the murder scene at extremely fast speeds. I have to save people. Clark stopped and without hesitation plunged into the lake and swam toward the bottom. Inside the sports car at this moment. Dark, cold, and depressing, this was Lex's first feeling. Countless lakes of water flowed in through the cracks in the car door, and the originally expensive sports car now became a life-threatening water cage. Lex's mouth and nose were filled with lake water. He struggled to open his eyes but could only see a blur of chaos. After taking a few sips of lake water and being unable to breathe, Lex's vision gradually blurred, and when it became blurry, it seemed as if a figure was slowly swimming towards him. Plop! Clark jumped into the water and swam through the lake like a torpedo to the front of the car. Glancing at Lex, who was unconscious due to water and lack of oxygen in the car, Clark reached out and grabbed the roof of the car and pulled hard. The solid roof was torn open with huge force, revealing a big hole. Clark reached out and grabbed Lex's collar, pulling him out of the lake. Laying the unconscious Lex flat on the grass by the lake, Clark leaned down and listened to Lex's heartbeat. The heartbeat was weak, and Clark had no time to hesitate. He opened Lex's mouth and began to give Lex artificial respiration according to the first aid knowledge he learned from his father Jonathan when he was a child. Don't die, hold on. Clark followed first aid knowledge and while ventilating Lex, he folded his hands and pressed Lex's chest. Under Clark's constant pressure, soon the unconscious Lex opened his mouth and spurted out a large mouthful of lake water. Seeing Lex regain consciousness, Clark also had an expression of relief on his face. Ahem! Lex coughed violently when he woke up. He slowly opened his eyes, and what he saw was a childish and young face. Did you save me? Lex stared up at Clark. Yes, you look like you need help. I saw a weird guy attacked you. Clark frowned and said what he had seen before, the figure that suddenly appeared. Yes, this is a premeditated murder. Lex Feng Qingyun smiled lightly, but in the bottom of his heart, he thought of Gino's warning last night. Maybe the guy who just attacked him was the one who suddenly disappeared not long ago and gained superpowers. Genome. Smallville Township High School. In the corridor, Gino threw his school bag behind his back with one hand and put his other hand in his pocket, ignoring the strange looks from the students around him and walking towards the classroom. Doo-doo. Kino picked up the phone and pressed the connect button. Clark's voice rang on the other end of the phone. Kino, your brother fell into the water. Chapter 11 Newspaper Investigation. Buzz. The silver Bugatti sports car swept across the field like a stream of light, and the surrounding scene passed by like flowing water. In the driving seat, Gino controlled the sports car with a gloomy expression. Just a few minutes ago, he learned what happened from Clark. My brother was attacked by Jerome. Jerome. Gino turned the steering wheel lightly and turned, and a bridge appeared in his field of vision. The bridge was filled with ambulances and crowds. Kino also saw a scrap sports car that had been salvaged from the shore. Bang! Gino opened the door and hurriedly pushed through the crowd to see Lex and Clark wrapped in red thermal blankets. At this moment, several police officers were surrounding the two people asking about the incident. Before Gino could get closer, he heard Lex's voice. It was just an ordinary car accident. I didn't see the road clearly and hit the highway bridge. Regarding the matter of extraordinary existence, Lex chose to hide it. On the other side, Clark sat on the rubble on the shore without saying a word. He acquiesced to Lex's words. If we say, this car accident was caused by a supernatural being, then people would just think they were crazy because they were hit with concussions. Lex, are you okay? Gino came to Lex's side and nodded to Clark to express his gratitude. If it weren't for Clark, my brother would probably be in trouble. Gino walked up to Lex, patted the cheap guy on the shoulder, and said in a low voice, I will find that guy, brother. We'll talk about something later. Lex glanced at Clark thoughtfully and glanced at his scrap sports car. Can ordinary people tear off the roof of a sports car by hand? Clark? Not far away, after learning the news, Jonathan ran down the dirt road beside the bridge. The middle-aged man looked nervous. When he saw Clark sitting on the stone, Jonathan rushed forward and clasped Clark's shoulders with both hands. He said in an excited tone, My child, are you okay? Clark looked into his father's eyes and felt the worried look on his face. Clark felt a warm current passing through his heart. He smiled and shook his head and said, I'm fine, Dad. After confirming that Clark was okay, Jonathan breathed a sigh of relief, but at the same time he was very angry and turned to look at the town policeman who was recording the confession. Who is the lunatic driving the car? It's me, Mr. Jonathan. Lex Luthor. Lex stood up and stared at Jonathan seriously. Mr. Jonathan, I am very grateful that your son saved me. Jonathan glanced at Lex, pursed his lips, and the middle-aged man opened his mouth and said, Maybe you should drive slower. I will, thank Clark again for saving my life. Lex's eyes fell on Clark's young cheeks. It's nothing. I believe if it were you, you would do the same thing. Future Superman looked up at Lex with a serious look on his face. Mr. Jonathan. Gino took a step forward. This also made Jonathan notice Gino. The man glanced at Gino. With long blonde hair and a handsome face, if his guess was correct, this guy was Clark's new friend yesterday, the crazy kid who crashed his car into a school bus. The first impression was very bad, but his good upbringing still made Jonathan nodded with a stiff face. Jonathan Kent, this is my son Clark Kent. I believe you guys already know him. Yes, Clark is a very good friend, and I can see your family tradition in him. Gino nodded slightly in a personable manner, and followed the topic, can I invite you to Luthor Castle? You saved my brother's life, maybe we should be able to give you something in return. Before Gino could finish his words, he was interrupted by Jonathan. The middle-aged man shook his head and helped Clark stand up and said, I don't need your reward. Kindness is an act from the heart. If possible. Jonathan walked to Gino's side and turned to look at the young man's profile. I hope you can tell your brother to drive slower next time. After saying this, Jonathan left with Clark. Whoosh! The river was flowing not far away. Lex walked to Kino and looked at the figures of Jonathan and his son, noble character. Yes. Jino sighed with a complicated expression, then shook his head and said, Lex, stay in the castle during this time. I will find Jerome as soon as possible and kill him. Just like what I have thought since I was a child, whoever dares to touch his family must pay a heavy price. Jerome must die, Jesus cannot save him even if he comes. No, Gino, I hope you can capture him alive. To Gino's surprise, Lex asked to catch him alive. Gino looked into Lex's eyes with a strange expression, but his brother's expression was serious and it didn't look like he was joking. He set the flag on his own. Was Lex intentional? So, you mean? Lex nodded. Gino turned his head and quickly guessed what Lex was thinking. My brother probably wanted to use Jerome as a guinea pig. Okay, I'll try my best to capture him alive. Gino sighed, thinking about how to find clues about Jerome. More than 10 years ago, that guy was treated as a scarecrow in high school, and the other person's previous phone calls were all about revenge. While thinking about it, an inspiration flashed in Gino's mind. I'm going back to school first. Gino didn't have time to explain to Lex, and immediately walked back to his sports car and drove back to school. Back in high school, Gino asked a classmate for the location of the campus newspaper, and then rushed to the newspaper office. Schools such as small-town high schools all implement happy education, so there are various clubs that have nothing to do with learning. Such as rugby club, basketball games, etc. The location of the campus newspaper is located on the right corner of the first floor of the main teaching building, in a room that was originally converted from a utility room. When Gino opened the door and walked in, he saw countless paper-cutting news plastered all over the wall. Kino. Chloe, who was lying in front of the computer processing documents, was a little surprised when Kino burst into the house. Little Black Pete was a little curious and said, "You missed gym class," and the coach was very angry. "It doesn't matter." Gino shook his head, then walked to Chloe and patted the girl's shoulder. His big blue eyes stared at Chloe seriously. "Chloe, I need your help." Okay. Chloe lowered her head in a panic to avoid Gino's gaze, and gently stroked her short hair beside her ears as if unintentionally. "What do you need me to do for you?" Peter on the side couldn't help but show an expression of hatred when he saw this scene, but he quickly stood next to Gino, intending to eat the melon. Gino ignored Peter, pinched his chin and said, "Help me find someone, probably a former student of the school named Jerome Carey." Chapter 12. Well said, the strong should bully the weak. The newspaper club has been established for a long time, and Chloe's computer is also connected to the campus intranet. The girl moved the mouse and tapped the keyboard. Soon, a photo of Jerome's head popped up on the girl's computer desktop. Name, Jerome Carey. 12 years ago, I was a high school student with excellent grades. However, after falling into a coma due to a wild disaster, I received funding from the Luther Group for 12 years. Chloe slid the roller and glanced at Gino with her peripheral vision. I didn't expect that this man was still connected to the Luther family. So, what are you asking about this guy? Xiao He was a little gossipy. He and I have some personal matters that need to be dealt with. He woke up not long ago and then disappeared. Gino smiled faintly, and then told Chloe, "Please help me check the members of Jerome's rugby team again." As Chloe clicked the mouse, a group photo of 3 strong men wearing rugby uniforms appeared in Kino's sight. These 3 people are David, Kent, and Lance. They were the dominant football team that year. Moreover, these guys happened to choose Jerome to be the scarecrow. Peter said mysteriously, "My mother's sister's ex-boyfriend's nephew was in the same class as Jerome at the time. The guy was taciturn and often bullied." "Really?" Gino pinched his chin and looked at the computer with a ghostly expression. "Thank you for your help. I'm going to leave for a while." After getting the information he wanted, Gino didn't stay any longer. He left the keys of his sports car to Chloe and the 2 of them, and joked with a smile, "This is your reward. You guys can drive it home after school. Bring it to school tomorrow." He never hesitates to repay someone for help, but because they are high school classmates, it is not easy for Gino to just throw money at it, as that would change the nature of it. "The boss is awesome." Peter raised his eyebrows. That was a sports car, and ordinary people would never be able to get their hands on it. As for having your self-esteem insulted? Come on, it's cool to show off to friends and relatives by driving a sports car, so everyone knows you have a friend who drives a sports car. And Peter and Chloe are not that sensitive and introverted. "See you tomorrow." Gino waved goodbye and the 2 opened the door and left. After Gino left, looking at the keys to the sports car on the table, Chloe and Peter looked at each other, and then both stretched out their devil claws towards the sports car. It is mine. Ignoring the commotion in the house fighting for the key, Kino walked out of the office and took out his cell phone to dial the number of the town police chief. Hello. Director George, it's me, Gino Luther. I want to ask you about a few people. Gino said calmly. When Director George on the other end of the phone heard the word Luther, he immediately lowered his voice and said respectfully, Sir, please give me your orders. I need to ask you about a few people. In a free America, rights serve money. The small town of Smallville is quiet and peaceful late at night. The climate here is slightly chilly at night. The full moon hangs high in the sky, and the bright and soft moonlight shines on the street, inside the garage located in the quiet street. The music player is playing a powerful rock song. A young man named David shook his head to the beat of the music while shaking the wrench in his hand to knock on the off-road vehicle in front of him to check its performance. Good boy. David returned to the parking space and twisted the key. He watched the engine roar and a proud smile appeared on the man's face. This business made money. Bang. The man closed the hood, and a figure stood in the corner not far away. The moonlight shone at his feet, making the young man's face flicker. Hey, this is private property. Do you need to repair your car? The middle-aged man frowned and subconsciously clenched the wrench in his hand. David Skin, the former captain of the football team, a popular figure on campus, and the object of girls' admiration, has now turned into a poor car mechanic. A slightly hoarse and youthful voice sounded in the workshop. The boy's words undoubtedly ignited David's anger. Farkey, get out of here. He tightened his grip on the wrench and walked towards the man. As the distance between the two people narrowed, the looming face gradually became clearer. Thin figure, sunken cheeks, wearing a cheap white hoodie. What frightened David the most was the man's cold and strange eyes. Wait. David stared at the young man. He felt that this man looked more and more familiar. I seem to know you. You're the Scarecrow Jerome. David stared at Jerome, with a look of contempt on his face. He glanced at the young man's clothes. Why do you have the nerve to mock me? You don't look rich either. Listening to the man's words, a hint of joking flashed in Jerome's eyes. No, 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 we are different. He spread his hands. I can mock you, naturally because I have the qualifications and strength to mock you. As soon as he finished speaking, Jerome's hands suddenly lit up with hot blue light. If he looked closely, he saw that it was actually streaks of violent electric current that were jumping and flickering. Snapped. Before the middle-aged man could react, Jerome suddenly grabbed the man's neck. Pfft. At the moment of skin contact, violent electric currents instantly flowed into the man's body, invading every blood vessel and violently destroying his body tissues. Oh, the man who was irrigated by the electric current was trembling all over and rolling his eyes, creating the famous scene of Wu Jing being electrocuted, and a strong smell of burnt smell surged up from his body. Haha. Jerome looked at the struggling man with a sick smile on his face. Yes, that's it. The strong want to humiliate the weak. Isn't this what you once taught me? Die me quickly. While shouting, Jerome continued to increase the current in his hands. Ah! The man let out a shrill scream, and the surrounding electrical appliances also exploded into clouds of sparks under the action of electric current. Crack! Along with the sparks and lightning, Jerome closed his eyes in enjoyment. Yes, that's it. Your screams are my sleeping requiem. Whoosh! Before Jerome had time to enjoy the process of torturing David, a whistling wind sounded in his ears, and he instantly felt a pain in his cheek. Bang! A fist hit the man's face without warning. Boom! The air exploded with a sonic explosion. The next second, the young man suddenly flew out like a baseball, and his body smashed into the scrapped car in the workshop. The huge force made his whole body embedded in the car door. My face! Falling on the car, Jerome wailed and covered his cheek. The punch not only knocked him away, but also broke several teeth on the right half of his face. The bright red blood also slid down the corner of his mouth, which looked quite ugly. For miserable! Who is it? Jerome looked at the dark figure in the corner with a malicious expression. Pa, pa, pa! A tall figure clapped his hands gently and walked out of the darkness. The moonlight dispersed the shadows, revealing a handsome face, but there was a look of contempt on the pretty cheeks. You're right, Jerome. The blonde young man rubbed his fists, shook his neck, stared at the young man in the corner and said, "The strong should humiliate the weak." Jino paused, hid the smile on his face, and said expressionlessly, "So are you ready?" Chapter 13. What did you say? I am listening. Pain, dizziness, and wanting to vomit, this was Jerome's current physical state after being punched by Jino. At this moment, the young man was lying on the ground with his arms and legs spread out. The shirt was stained red with blood. His cheeks were swollen, his brain was dizzy as if it had been filled with lead, and blood flowed from his mouth and nose. Jerome suppressed his nausea and struggled to open his eyes that were red due to concussion. "It's you." He looked at the expressionless Jino, who was now crossing his arms and looking down at Jerome. "This is impossible." Jerome covered his forehead and stared at Jino. That punch just now was beyond what ordinary people could do. You know, Jerome has also checked his body since waking up. The awakened electric energy has greatly strengthened his body, and even ordinary bullets may not penetrate his skin. But Jino broke several of his teeth with just one punch. Eliminate all options and the one remaining is the truth. The other party has also awakened his superpower. What? You look surprised. Jino sneered, did you feel that you had awakened your powers, and had bad thoughts in your mind like I am the chosen one? Jino's eyes were joking, unfortunately, the reality is that I am far stronger than you. Jino's words successfully broke Jerome's guard. The man's pale cheeks turned from white to red, and then turned faintly black. He was obviously very angry. Shut up, he yelled, raising his arms and shooting out the stored electricity. Crack! The thick electric currents were like roaring thunder dragons. Each electric current was the size of an adult's arm. They struck Jino with violent power. Ha ha ha! Looking at the figure annihilated by the current, Jerome's eyes flashed with pathology. Idiot, do you think I'm arguing with you? I'm just buying time for myself. This is the gap between us, our IQs are crushing. Jerome's expression was ferocious, and he gritted his teeth and roared, go to hell, soon your brother will go to hell to accompany you. Jerome increased the current output again. Feeling that the overall situation had been decided, Jerome was madly talking. Just as Jerome was venting his emotions, a faint voice came from the current, Jerome, it's not okay to open champagne at halftime. What? Jerome was stunned, and the lightning in his hand gradually went out. How could you? Why don't you hide? As the smoke dissipated, the blonde young man stood intact, but unfortunately his custom-made white shirt turned into tatters. Do you need to hide? Jino said calmly. Do you think it's because of IQ crushing? Jino patted the flames on his shirt and raised his eyebrows and said, actually, your attack poses no threat to me. While saying this, Jino walked towards Jerome slowly. He really didn't know where Jerome's confidence came from. Maybe it was because the punch just now broke Jerome's head. You know what? Jino said calmly, like a cat playing with a mouse, originally I planned to keep you alive and take you back, but now. As soon as the words fell, Jino's whole body instantly turned into an afterimage and suddenly stood in front of Jerome, before he could react. Snapped. An iron hand, as if made of steel, mercilessly clasped Jerome's neck, and his blue eyes stared at Jerome's pale cheek without emotion. I will never allow anyone to threaten my family. So you'd better die. After saying this, Jino raised his other fist and punched it hard. Bang! The arm exerted force, the terrifying power broke through the air and rolled up layers of air waves, and the violent fist hit Jerome hard on the left cheek with strong wind. Kaka! His fist easily shattered the bones. There was a crisp sound of bone cracking. Jerome's thin cheeks swollen at a speed visible to the naked eye, and several broken teeth mixed with blood fell down his mouth. Kino's punch made Jerome's concussion more serious, and the young man felt that there were 3 kilos smiling at him in front of him. There was a buzzing noise in my ears. Jerome moaned meaninglessly. Jino's expression remained unchanged, and he raised his fist again. Seeing Jino gradually raise his fist, Jerome trembled in his heart. If he was punched again, he would die. Holding back his nausea, Jerome said with difficulty, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Please let me go. Under the threat of death, Jerome, who was originally tough-talking and arrogant, immediately gave in. I'd like to work for you. He didn't want to die under Kino's fist. A flattering smile appeared on Jerome's face. Kino, you are right. The strong should humiliate the weak. I am the weak. Haha. Looking at the subdued Jerome, Gino slightly let go of his left hand, allowing Jerome to breathe. Seeing Gino's ambiguous smile, Jerome quickly prayed again, "It's worth more to let me go than to kill me. I can control electricity and have super speed. I'm very strong." Gino tilted his head and nodded in agreement, "You are right, living is better than dying." Seeing that Gino's attitude softened, Jerome relaxed in his heart and smiled on his face, "Yes, it was all a misunderstanding before. I'm very sorry. But..." Gino tilted his head and raised the corners of his mouth slightly, "I don't need you to live. Why didn't you say sorry when you attacked my brother? It's too late to apologize now." Gino stared coldly into Jerome's eyes, his eyes were full of cowardice. Gino sneered, "If it weren't for the Luther family's support for you, you would have died of being unable to pay your medical bills and would have been euthanized. The medical system in the United States is not as cheap as advertised. On the contrary, in the United States, only rich people get sick, and the poor can only take painkillers to numb themselves. So," Gino said in a long tone, "a dead Jerome is a good Jerome." After the words fell, Gino raised his fist. "What?" Jerome's face changed drastically, and his original joy was instantly filled with anger and resentment. The man's face was ferocious and he roared, "Fake! You devil, I curse you!" At this moment, Jerome was extremely angry. The other party was just playing tricks on him. He wanted to kill himself from the beginning. Bang! Before Jerome could finish his words, an iron fist far more terrifying than last time suddenly hit Jerome on the head. The hard skull shattered instantly like soft tofu under the iron fist. Some blood was sprinkled on Gino's face, making his expression look even more gloomy and terrifying. White stuff mixed with skulls were scattered on the floor, leaving only the headless corpse twitching wildly, proving the unwillingness of the owner of the corpse. "Sorry, what did you say?" Gino was carrying the headless body and put his other hand on his ear. No one responded. Gino shrugged with regret, "In the next life, remember not to threaten other people's families. They don't have a good temper like me." Well, the kind of good temper that blows your head off. Chapter 14 Bet. Luther Castle. In the middle of the night, the lights of the castle flickered on the mottled wall tiles. The wall tiles were covered with green moss, and in the manor under the wall tiles, several gardeners carried black body bags towards the basement of the castle with expressionless faces. They are all lifelong employees of the Luther Group, with high wages and good benefits. In other words, they can also be regarded as hereditary official positions of Luther's dynasty workers. They have strict mouths and don't have to worry about betrayal. Inside the castle at this moment, the luxurious and older fireplace burned brightly, and the burning wood made a crackling sound under the burning flame. "So, he's still dead." Lex leaned over the pool table, pointed the cue at the pool ball and pushed lightly. Snapped. After clearing the last pool ball, Lex stood up and looked at Gino, who was lying on the sofa on the other side, enjoying the service of the maid feeding little oranges. Gino bit into the orange and felt the sweet and sour juice bursting in his mouth. He said vaguely, "That guy is too extreme. I don't think it's a good thing to keep him alive." Lex shrugged. For his wisdom, there was a difference between living and dead experimental subjects, but it was not big. "Okay, but that Clark..." Lex dropped the club and picked up the expensive red wine on the table, took a sip and then spit it out. "Yes, that guy is also a superhuman." Gino shrugged, "His achievements in the future may be the same as your wisdom, and he can reach a height that is unimaginable by humans. I didn't expect you to think so highly of him." Lex raised his eyebrows. He felt that he was one of the smartest people in the world. "Because he saved your life, I gave him impression points." Gino rolled his eyes. "Speaking of this," Lex scratched his bald head, "how do you think I should repay him? Send him an expensive sports car? I remember high school students like this." But Lex had a headache again, and he thought to himself, "I remember when I was a kid, my father discussed buying their farm with the Kent family. Even if they offered a sky-high price, the Kents didn't agree." For Lex, money is not an issue, but owing favors is more uncomfortable for a proud person like Lex than killing him, so Lex can't wait to repay the life-saving favor he owes. "I think we can let them accept gifts." Gino chuckled. Lex frowned slightly, because Gino's expression was so familiar. Whenever this little bastard shows such a smiling expression, the next sentence will definitely mock him. "Want to make a bet?" Gino stretched out his hand and gently touched the maid's red lips, letting the orange juice stay on the maid's lips, I can let the Kent family accept your gift. The blonde maid also very sensibly poked out her tongue, stared at Jino with her charming eyes, and licked the orange juice from the corner of her mouth. Lex crossed his arms and turned a blind eye to Jino's teasing of the maid. My brother looks bohemian, but he is actually a flirt, and he is still a boy. Lex thought to himself. He was still more curious about whether what Jino said was true. He had seen Jonathan, a righteous and stubborn person with his own ethics. The nicer words are called principled, and the harsher words can only be called very stubborn, just like the rocks in the pit are smelly and hard, but Kino actually said that there is a way to make the Kent family accept gifts. Lex was skeptical at heart. Okay, what's the bet? Lex sneered, not panicking at all. I bet on the contact information of those killers on your mobile phone. Jinotu said. You want to kill someone? You can tell me who you want to kill. Lex frowned. To be honest, he didn't want Jino to get too close to those guys in the dark world. It's not murder, it's just that some things need to be done by someone. Jino shook his head without explaining too much. In fact, he was just curious if he had the contact information of the famous assassins in the DC world. For example, the League of Assassins, or even the famous Deathstroke. Why curious? Because these are all points for walking. As a man who was born at the end of Rome, Jino is not a lunatic who destroys and conquers the world. The education received by ordinary people in his previous life also prevents him from becoming a scumbag, but his determination to become stronger remains unchanged. There is no such thing as strong, only stronger, and if you want to become stronger, you need the negative emotions of the strong to provide points. This is the logic of Kino. Lex on the side frowned thoughtfully after listening to Jino's words, but the smart bald man nodded after thinking about it. Okay, I believe you can handle these things, let's make a bet. As he spoke, Lex turned his head and looked at the garage outside the window. I remember there seems to be a Cadillac in the garage. It was a brand new day. When Jino opened his eyes and woke up from the 3-meter-wide soft bed, the obedient maids had already prepared breakfast. After bringing the steaming food to the bed, Jino simply ate some seagull egg rolls with milk, silently criticizing the simple and unpretentious life of Zamoto's family. After getting dressed, Jino picked up the Cadillac keys on the table, spoke to Lex and drove to school. While passing by Kent Farm, Kino happened to meet Clark, who was waiting for the school bus. But it seemed that Clark was in a bad mood, with a gloomy look on his face, as if someone owed him $1 million. When the car approached Clark, Jino also heard the system broadcast in his mind. Negative emotions from Clark Kent plus 50, plus 50. What's going on? Jino was shocked. Clark's negative emotions crazily sent gold coins to the system early in the morning, but thinking that this was the youth version of Clark Kent, he also had some guesses in his mind. Adolescent children only care about those 3 things: face, money, and money. All 3 could be reasons for Clark's bad mood. Looking at Clark's declining expression, Jino guessed that the latter was more likely. The poor innocent boy Clark might have been emotionally frustrated. While thinking about it, Jino stepped on the accelerator. The roar of the red off-road vehicle interrupted Clark's thoughts. Last night, Clark, who used a telescope to observe the movements of the goddess, witnessed with his own eyes the scene of the goddess Lana Blue kissing Whitney, who had a broken arm and was in a plaster. This made Clark's feeling very bad. Hey, Clark! Kino lightly stepped on the brakes and stopped the off-road vehicle in front of Clark. He patted the co-pilot with a frivolous brow and said, waiting for the school bus again. Just kidding, he is a scoring machine in action, can he still let Clark escape? The red SUV stopped in front of Clark, and Kino turned off the engine and pushed open the door. It's for you. Jino threw the key in his hand and walked to Clark. What? Clark looked confused and subconsciously took the car keys thrown by Jino with his right hand. Chapter 15. Just smash it if you don't want it. Weeds were all over the ground, and the breeze brought fresh air. Clark took a deep breath, and for the first time, he felt his heartbeat speed up. The key to the off-road vehicle lay quietly in his palm. Just like Lex said, the dream of many American high school students is to have their own car. Clark looked at the car keys in his hand, and then moved his eyes to the red off-road sports car in front of him. The rough and ferocious body, the flowing lines of the car, and the red paint made this off-road vehicle extremely eye-catching on the road. If I were to drive such a car on the road, it would surely attract Lana's attention, right? Clark didn't notice at all. The corners of his originally lowered mouth were slightly raised, and the arc of his smile could hardly be suppressed. Well, Clark looked like a big licking dog at this moment. But, why? Clark clenched his fists excitedly and looked at Gino beside him. Why did the other party give him an expensive off-road vehicle? The blonde boy chuckled, gently hooked Clark's neck, patted Clark's shoulder, and pointed at the sports car with the arm on Clark's shoulder, Cadillac Escalade. This car is a gift from me to you, thank you for saving my brother. Gino felt that a person should know how to repay kindness. If someone saved his brother, it wouldn't be too much to give him a $300,000 off-road vehicle. Wow, this is really true. Clark gasped excitedly and walked slowly around the red off-road vehicle, like a relative meeting. He carefully stretched out his palm and put it against the car, his face full of excitement and happiness. However, when he thought of his stern father, Clark's originally smiling cheeks froze slightly, his energy became depressed, and he lowered his head in frustration. I'm sorry, Gino, I can't accept such an expensive gift. He knew that his father would never let him accept Gino's gift. Negative emotion from Clark Kent +1, +1. Seeing Clark's reaction, Gino was not surprised. After all, the big boy had a strict father, and it was impossible for him to let Clark accept such an expensive gift. But that makes it more challenging, right? After all, the two things a man loves most in life are to persuade prostitutes to be good and to force good men to become prostitutes. Today, Clark must accept this off-road vehicle. He has never lost a bet with Lex. Moreover, Gino had thought of a way before he came. No. Gino raised his eyebrows. Clark was silent and nodded with difficulty for a long time. Yes, please go back. I don't save people in return. Clark lowered his head and nodded lightly. Okay, let's smash it. Gino raised his fist and then suddenly smashed it towards the hood of the off-road vehicle. What? Clark's face changed drastically as he watched Gino's unhurried fist about to land on the hood. Clark has seen the power of Gino. This punch will definitely smash the car engine and turn it into a pile of scrap metal. The fist was getting closer and closer. It seemed that what Gino wanted to smash was just a piece of cheap tofu. His handsome face was full of calmness and ruthlessness. Damn it! Clark rarely cursed. Snapped. The moment his fist fell, Clark raised his right hand and clasped Gino's wrist. Why did you smash it? Clark was a little angry, staring at Gino's blue eyes with his big eyes, as if he wanted to see what was in Gino's heart. Smashing expensive cars is a waste of wealth. Because it's a gift for you. Gino gently shook off Clark's arm and said calmly, there is no precedent for returning gifts sent by the Luther family. Gino glanced at Clark accidentally. If you don't want it, you can only smash it. With that said, Gino raised his fist again. Arrogant and domineering, this is the true portrayal of Gino at this moment. Wait. Clark pursed his lips and clasped Gino's wrist. He really couldn't accept the off-road vehicle being scrapped in front of his eyes, but he couldn't accept this gift either. Gino saw the confusion in Clark's eyes, and he changed his words and said, since you won't let me smash it, then let me keep this car with you for now, Clark. Keeping it? Clark thought thoughtfully, then smiled bitterly. The safekeeping that Gino mentioned was probably for a lifetime. What's the difference between this and a disguised gift? This is another way of saying it. Gino didn't care about Clark's thoughts. He opened the passenger door, took out his sunglasses from his white shirt pocket and put them on. He looked down at his watch, knocked on the car door, and turned to look at Clark, who was standing on the roadside with a complicated expression. Can you drive? If you don't leave, we'll be late. Alas. Clark sighed, but the smile on his lips still proved that he was in a good mood. Yes. I learned to get a driver's license last summer. Clark opened the car door with excitement, inserted the key and turned the ignition. The off-road vehicle roared, and the powerful push on his back made Clark's blood boil. Clark glanced at Gino gratefully, and the bitter and resentful expression on his face disappeared, replaced by a spirit of high spirits, and shouted loudly, Gino, sit down. Oh. Gino raised his eyebrows and complimented, why? Because. Clark put the gear into gear and released the clutch, then stepped on the accelerator with his right foot to increase the engine speed. The next step will be very soon. Smallville Township High School. Buzz Chloe carefully drove the silver Bugatti sports car to a slow stop in front of the parking space. Little Black Pete followed Chloe out of the sports car, patted the car with some reluctance, and murmured, Man, I'm going to miss your speed. Don't be depressed, Maybe if you work hard and endure hardship, you can buy this sports car sooner or later. Chloe carried her school bag. Come on, I can't afford this sports car even if I sell all my internal organs. Little Black Pete rolled his eyes. He didn't believe in the silly rhetoric of making money through hard work. Buzz! The roar of an off-road vehicle interrupted their thoughts. Many students walking into the campus stopped and turned to look into the distance. A red off-road monster drove into the parking lot at a neither fast nor slow speed and parked in the left parking space of the silver sports car. Good morning, everyone. Clark, with a bright face, opened the door and stepped out of the car. Your keys. Chloe walked towards Gino to return the keys to the sports car. Wow, Gino, how many cars do you have? Pete looked at the steel behemoth in front of him with an expression of emotion. This red off-road vehicle is so cool. I don't know, probably more than 10, but this car no longer belongs to me, it belongs to Clark now. Gino smiled and patted Clark on the shoulder, while Clark smiled shyly, I just keep it for you. However, when Chloe and Peter heard Gino's explanation, their eyes widened, as if they had seen a ghost. What? The two looked at each other and said in unison, you gave Clark a car. For a moment, Chloe even thought that Gino might not have any bad thoughts about Clark, otherwise why would he give Clark a car for no reason? Are all rich people so willful? Thank you to reader 1455147117727412224 for the 200-point reward, thank you boss, super loud. Chapter 16 Roaring What? What's that look in your eyes? Gino noticed Chloe's gaze and unceremoniously stretched out his hand to hold the girl's head, and rubbed Chloe's short blonde hair with a little force. The girl was in pain and screamed, I just washed my hair. Chloe covered her head pitifully, and pushed Gino's mischievous hand away with her small hands. Because Clark saved my brother, this car is a thank you to Clark. Gino retracted his arms and put his hands in his pockets to explain. What? You saved Gino's brother? Peter looked at Clark in surprise, no wonder you didn't come to school that day. It's just a piece of cake. Clark scratched his cheek in embarrassment, while little Black Pete sighed, if I had known, I would have skipped class that day. Come on, you can't swim. Chloe exposed Peter ruthlessly. The group of people walked towards the teaching building chatting and laughing. The campus was bustling with people in the early morning. Gino glanced at the crowd and landed on Whitney, who was wearing a plaster. This guy was surrounded by school team members wearing baseball jackets and was walking towards the playground under the leadership of the physical education teacher. The physical education teacher on campus is a middle-aged white man with a wide body and fat body. His hair is covered with hair gel, which makes him look like a gangster. Wait a minute, kids. Coach Watt frowned, his fat cheeks squeezing, as if carving a big word chew on his forehead. The man loosened his collar, and his fat belly trembled slightly. He stared at the group of 4 people walking towards the teaching building not far away, and his eyes fell on Gino. That kid hurt your arm? Whitney. Coach Watt glanced at Whitney from the corner of his eye. Whitney gritted her teeth and nodded slightly, yes, I suspect it's him. Although the incident of his amputated hand that day became an unsolved case in the town, Whitney's intuition told him that it was probably Gino's fault. I remember, he skipped my PE class yesterday. Coach Watt squinted his eyes slightly, showing off his fiery temper. The man walked towards Gino. The rugby players behind him made eye contact with each other, and then followed Coach Watt to watch. The excitement of Gino. Their coach is not a good-tempered boss. He has a hot temper and hits and scolds the players. Kid! Coach Watt yelled, stopping the 4 people who were rushing to school. Oh, it's Coach Watt. He may be asking you about not coming to class yesterday. Little Black Pete shrank his head. It was obvious that he was very afraid of this coach. Chloe also gave Gino a look that was asking for blessings. She felt that Gino would be unlucky today. Clark was the only one with a worried expression. He tensed up, worried about a conflict between Gino and Coach Watt, and then Gino broke Coach Watt's arm in anger. He needs to be ready to stop Gino. What's the matter? Gino stopped and turned to look at Coach Watt, who was several heads shorter than him. From Gino's perspective, Coach Watt looks like an angry groundhog at this moment. Coach Watt stared at Gino, the two looked at each other, and the air seemed to be burning with an intangible flame. However, having experienced strong winds and waves since childhood, the gap between Coach Watt and Gino was as huge as the area of the ocean, whether it was mentality or momentum. In the end, Coach Watt couldn't bear such a cold atmosphere and sneered and said, "Gino. Luther, right? It's me." Gino nodded indifferently. He was not a fool. He could tell that this middle-aged man came with bad intentions, so Gino's reaction was not enthusiastic. "What's the matter?" Before Gino could finish his words, he was interrupted by Coach Watt. "Shut up, kid." Coach Watt's voice was very high, almost a roar when he was talking to Gino. He stared at Gino with his bullseyes, pointed at himself with his right hand, and nodded at Gino from a distance. "I said, you listen, do you understand?" With that said, before Gino could react, the man said, "In view of your behavior of skipping class yesterday, I think you should be given some punishment." The man turned to look at his football team and sneered, "I don't care if you are a Luther family or some other bullshit family. Here, if you skip class, you must be punished." The middle-aged man stared at Gino's beautiful cheeks and said with a sinister smile, "And your punishment is to wash the socks of all the key players on the football team for a week." After the words fell, the team members behind him let out a burst of ridicule and sarcasm. "Wow, looks like I won't be changing my socks for a few weeks then. I think we should change them 3 times a day and let him wash a few more pairs." Listening to the sarcasm of these people, Gino looked calm, but the 3 people beside him couldn't stand still. "Coach, this is against school rules." Chloe said first, "The punishment for students skipping class is only to write a 1,000 word self-criticism. It does not include washing other people's socks." "Yes, you are abusing your power, Coach Watt." Clark said with a serious face as he took a firm step forward to express his determination to stand. Me too." Little Black Pete gritted his teeth and hesitated before slowly raising his hand. "Shut up, you have no right to speak here." Watt gritted his teeth and stared at the 3 of them. "Get out of here before I get angry. Otherwise, you wash socks with him." Listening to Watt's roar, the 3 of them couldn't help but turn pale. For the 3 simple high school students, the power brought by the roaring Coach Watt made them fearful. At this moment, many students passing by were secretly observing the group, and many were whispering with their companions about what happened. "So, did you hear what I said?" Coach Watt looked at Gino, who was calm but silent, with a proud look on his face. Even if he is from the Luther family, he is just a high school student. Isn't it easy for him to suppress a high school student with the authority he has formed as a coach for more than 10 years? Looking at the arrogant Watt, even Clark couldn't help but feel angry, but Clark found that Gino was unexpectedly calm. "Watt, roaring won't win people's respect." Under Clark's gaze, Gino slowly spoke. The boy sighed and stared at the school badge on Watt's clothes. "If I remember correctly, the Luther Group the city will provide $500,000 to the small town's high school for school development and staff welfare. I have always felt that the teachers at Smallville Township High School should be polite and well educated. But your performance has greatly refreshed my understanding of the school." Kino took out his mobile phone without hesitation and dialed Lex's number. "Maybe I should ask my brother to stop funding the high school." Gino put the phone to his ear and smiled evilly at Watt. "When school leaders know why, I hope I can still hear your roar. There may be typos if you type too fast. Readers may see that you can press and hold the wrong field to correct it. Xiao Mo will correct it if he sees it." Chapter 17. I still like to see you acting unruly. Gino still remembers the education department of the tutor hired by his father when he was a child. There is a class that discusses society. Kino remembers several questions the teacher asked. What is the nature of social functioning? In Kino's view, it is the plundering and exploitation of social resources. Reciprocal power evolves based on the amount of social resources possessed. Those with abundant resources will have more privileges. So, what is power? It is a kind of cruel beast that is invisible and intangible, but it hides in the darkness and kills invisible people under the sea. As a second generation, Gino knows that his family's power can allow him to walk sideways in a free America. He doesn't like to use power to oppress others, but that doesn't mean he won't use his power, especially when dealing with a brainless fool like Watt. The verbal offense would not cause Kino to break Watt's arm, but it was necessary to punish Watt. And how to make Watt pay the price? All he needed was a phone call to make Watt pay for his actions. This is the power of power. At this moment, everyone outside the campus was shocked by Gino's operation. Whitney swallowed nervously, her arm in a cast aching. What did he hear? The Luther Group actually donates $500,000 to the school every year. This means that many of the staff's salaries come from the Luther Group's funding. If the Luther Group really stops funding the high school department, the staff's salaries may have to be cut significantly. There are not a few students who have this idea, and many of them focus on Coach Watt, whose face is ashen. At this moment, Coach Watt clenched his fists, and he swore that if he was in a deserted corner, he would beat this damn brat hard. While thinking about it, Coach Watt stared at Gino's calm face with eyes full of resentment. He originally thought that this kid would do some tricks like suing parents, but he didn't expect that he would just flip the table. Will the school give up $500,000 in annual funding for itself? Coach Watt shook his head in his heart, deceiving himself and thinking. No, I brought out 4-time rugby club champions in the town, and the school will not fire me. Gino didn't know Watt's tangled and nervous mood at the moment, but even if he knew, he wouldn't care. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, the call was connected, and Gino smiled and pressed the hands-free button on the phone with his thumb. Hello. Lex's voice rang from the phone. I have something to talk about. I'm having a meeting at the company. Lex's style is as concise and efficient as ever. In addition to being a scientist, Lex is also a qualified businessman. Lex, I was just threatened by a teacher to wash the stinky socks of the campus football team for a week. Gino said unhurriedly, while staring at Coach Watt, his eyes full of mockery. I think we should stop annual funding for schools. Washing socks? Lex on the other end of the phone was currently sitting in an empty conference room, leaning his bald head gently on the boss's chair, and couldn't help but sneered. Someone actually threatened his brother to wash his socks. None of his brothers had washed themselves. Lex's first reaction was to put pressure on the school to fire this reckless physical education teacher. But then I thought, Gino should have his own plan, so Lex was silent for a moment and said, I will ask the secretary to inform the school principal. After saying that, Lex hung up the phone and looked at the secretary who was waiting beside him. Go and inform Smallville Town High School that starting today, Lex Group will stop funding the school. The secretary was stunned for a moment, then subconsciously reminded, Boss, but funding for schools can offset our tax collection. In terms of profits, if funding for the campus is stopped, our local businesses may need to pay $1 million in taxes each year. It's not important. Lex interrupted the secretary rudely, looking at the secretary with a pair of eyes. I only know that those guys humiliated my brother, they must show their attitude. Meeting Lex's cold eyes, the secretary's heart trembled, and he quickly bowed his head respectfully. I'll contact you right away. At the school on the other side, Gino hung up the phone and smiled provocatively. Coach Watt. Gino snapped his fingers. Would you like to guess how long it will take for Principal Zyagwin and the others to arrive? As he spoke, Gino looked down at his watch. I believe it won't take more than a minute. Listening to Gino's words, Coach Watt's expression became even colder. He wanted to open his mouth to say something to give in, but the bustling crowd around him made him open his mouth but no sound came out. At this moment, the anger in his heart had long dissipated, and Coach Watt was horrified to find that he felt a little more regretful. The long-term comfortable life made him forget the first rule of survival in the United States, which is not to provoke the big family. And now, it's time for him to pay for his actions. Give in, give in. There were shouts in the distance. The crowd watching the excitement was roughly pushed away, and Principal Guan, dressed in a suit, barged in violently with 6 or 7 school leaders with serious faces. They jogged all the way and even their ties were a little crooked. Don't care about tidying up your appearance. Mr. Gino Luther. Upon seeing Gino, Principal Guan suddenly showed an eager smile. Like a caring elder, he clasped Gino's arm and asked, I heard that someone was rude to you. As he spoke, Principal Guan glanced at Coach Watt, who was standing there blankly, with a look of disgust. The staff behind him also stared at Watt with disgust, and the meaning in their eyes made Coach Watt fearful. They were planning to fire him. The students looked at the sudden appearance of the school leaders in shock. Chloe poked the little black Pete and Clark who were addicted to eating melon with her elbow, lowered her voice and lowered her head and said, it only took 40 seconds. Yet, because I skipped class yesterday, Coach Watt asked me to clean the socks for the school football team for a week. Gino stared at Watt's blue cheeks with a half-smile. His original arrogant attitude was gone, and now he looked like an unemployed middle-aged man. He is a young social animal, his eyes full of confusion. But Gino would not pity this guy. If he was just an ordinary student, then accepting the humiliation of cleaning socks for a week would be his inevitable fate. Therefore, when dealing with evil people, Gino is stingy with his kindness and kindness. To be kind to evil people is to be cruel to good people. So that's it. Principal Guan frowned, secretly cursing Watt that he drank too much every day after work and damaged his brain. If you ask a rich second generation to wash the socks of your rugby players, are you worthy of it? While thinking about it, Principal Guan gave the other leaders a look. No matter what, things have happened. They must find a way to calm down the anger of the Luther family and keep the indispensable $500,000. Coach Watt. The leader responsible for managing the student code took a step forward and said righteously, according to the school's student code of conduct law management regulations, students who skip classes only need to write a 1,000-word review. Your behavior seriously violated the school rules. Moreover, treating a student in this way will cause great harm to his body and mind. Chapter 18 Conditions for Forgiving You. There is a saying that goes well, when you succeed, everyone will be kind and lovely to you. In the same way, when you are a rich second generation, only respect and humility will remain on people's faces. At this moment, the two levels were reversed, and a group of school leaders attacked Coach Watt mercilessly with all their firepower. The person in charge of managing teacher transfers was a middle-aged white woman. She said expressionlessly, threatening students with corporal punishment is shameless. Coach Watt, you must leave this school. That's right, Coach Watt, your behavior will bring shame to our high school department. Principal Guan also had a righteous expression. Between $500,000 and a physical education teacher, they made their choice without even thinking. How is this possible? Coach Watt opened his mouth with a dull expression. You can't do this. Watt stammered, not knowing where to put his hands. Sometimes he touched his hair filled with hair gel, and sometimes he squeezed his thighs. I bled for the school. I bled for the school. The school competed for 4 championships. He couldn't imagine what would happen if he lost his job. Watt, who had been in this school for decades, had become a cooked frog. If he lost his job, he didn't know what else he could do. Looking for a new school? The Luther group would not let him go, and no school would take him in at the risk of offending the Luther group. Sorry, Watt, we cannot accept your behavior. Principal Guan's expression was calm and he turned a blind eye to Watt's plea. He turned to Gino and once again put on an eager expression. Mr. Gino. Principal Guan's face was full of flattery and respect, and his tone was low and quick. Are you satisfied with the result of this process? If you are satisfied, please tell Mr. Lex and ask him to continue to support the development of the town's high school. Yes, Mr. Gino, you are a good boy. The woman from the Academic Affairs Office pursed her lips and lowered her voice. You just skipped 1 class, and I will write 1,000 words of self-criticism for you. Looking at Coach Watt, who looked in decline, there was also a group of school leaders who were surrounding Genyo to show their hospitality. Whether it is the football players or the Clarks, everyone's understanding of wealth and power has once again been refreshed. It turns out that having money really does make it possible. In full view. No, I'm not satisfied with the result. Genyo spoke slowly, and the atmosphere instantly became deserted. Everyone closed their mouths and looked forward to what Genyo would say next. I think it would be cruel to fire Coach Watt. Genyo chuckled, with a gentle smile on his face. After all, he has dedicated a lot to this school. Hearing Genyo's words, Watt's originally dull eyes suddenly glowed with luster. He stared at Genyo with gratitude in his eyes, and his lips moved to say words of thanks. What? Principal Guan looked confused. Could it be that they flattered the horse's legs? Even the 3 Clarks were confused, thinking that Genyo was stupid. Watt was not worthy of pity at all. I think we can give the person who made the mistake a chance. Amid everyone's doubts, Genyo glanced at Whitney, who was the one who shouted happily behind Watt just now. So. Genyo spoke slowly and said in a long tone, as long as Coach Watt washes Whitney's socks in public, you can stay in this school, and the Luther group will continue to support the development of the small town high school. Buzz. After Genyo finished speaking, the originally silent crowd suddenly became excited. Oh my god, let Coach Watt wash Whitney's socks. Clark in the crowd couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. This. He looked at the confused Whitney, and to be honest, Clark felt a little gloating in his heart. Little Black Pete covered his mouth and said to Clark. Oh my god, if I were Coach Watt, I would be so ashamed that I would want to die. This is just killing people or something, that Eastern proverb. Killing kills the heart. Chloe's beautiful eyes stared at Genyo's profile and murmured, I almost thought he had become a virgin. It seems that this guy hasn't changed at all. The other side. When he heard Gino's conditions, Watt's expression was as disgusting as if he had swallowed a fly. He originally thought that the other party was showing great kindness, but what greeted him was a deeper humiliation. Gino sneered, looked at Watt, whose face turned pale and green, and urged, "Make a choice, Coach Watt. Do you want face or work?" Anger burned in Watt's heart. At this moment, he wanted to scream and rush forward to kill Gino. This extreme humiliation made Watt clench his fists and his breathing gradually became heavier, like an old scalper whistling and panting. But thinking about the rest of his life, the clenched arm slowly loosened, and Watt endured the humiliation and said, "I'll wash it." With that said, Watt turned to look at Whitney and roared, "Take off your shoes, kid." Watt lowered his voice, "If you still want to keep your position as football captain, take off your socks. Also, go get me a basin of water personally." More and more students arrived, and soon some students brought water basins. Whitney had a weird expression, but forced by Watt's eyes, Whitney lowered her head and took off her shoes. "Wow, I didn't expect Whitney to be wearing Winnie the Pooh socks." Black Pete unconsciously complained when he saw the socks on Whitney's feet, which made the crowd laugh. The sour smell made everyone retreat unconsciously. Amidst the jeers, Whitney handed Watt her socks. Everyone watched as the fat Watt squatted down, soaked the smelly socks in water and rubbed them. Time after time, it seemed that Watt was not rubbing his socks, but was venting his anger. "Coach Watt, I hope you can remember this lesson." Gino looked at the deflated Watt with an expressionless face. To be honest, teaching this kind of clown would not bring him any pleasure at all. "Let's go." Gino led the three people and planned to leave. "Hey, what happened here?" Lana Blue, Whitney's girlfriend, heard the news and rushed here. When she saw her boyfriend standing there with bare feet and red face, while Coach Watt was rubbing his socks, Lana walked towards Gino with a gloomy face. "This seems to be bullying, Mr. Gino Luther. You should be ashamed of what you did." "Whoa!" Before Lana could get closer, Gino and Clark's expressions turned white and blue at the same time. And this unusual scene was also noticed by some interested people. Gino suppressed his dizziness and made up his mind. Kryptonite had too great an impact on him, and he had to take away this gadget that threatened him. "The longer I stayed, the weaker I felt. Maybe." Under the influence of kryptonite, Gino did not choose to argue with Lana. The top-heavy Gino gently leaned on Chloe's shoulder and motioned for the girl to take him away. Before leaving, Gino looked deeply at Lana. "Miss Lana, I look forward to meeting you next time." The account that Lana scolded in public was written down by herself first. Chapter 19: The Quarrel Between Father and Son. On campus. "Why do you always look guilty every time you meet Lana Blue?" Chloe pouted and put one hand on Gino's waist. "Is it possible that you all like that guy?" Little Black Pete pretended to be Sherlock Holmes and asked while holding his chin. Away from Lana, the feeling of exhaustion left him. Gino smiled, patted Chloe's shoulder and straightened his back. He glanced at the little black man again and said, "Maybe it's just your imagination." For schools like Smallville Township High School, they implement happy education, so students are arranged to have free activities in the afternoon of the high school. Clark planned to drive home with Kino, but Kino said he had to take a step forward. So Clark had to drive home alone. While driving an expensive off-road vehicle, he also met Whitney and Lana Blue. Whitney's jealous eyes greatly satisfied Clark's vanity. The car stereo played music called "A Bite Flag." Clark moved his head to the music and controlled the off-road vehicle with one hand to drive to his farm. He had never felt so happy. This expensive off-road vehicle was like a bomb that disrupted his life, adding some passion and happiness to the ordinary life. Buzz! Clark stepped on the accelerator lightly, and the roaring SUV slowly stopped in front of the fence. At this moment, Martha, who was handling forage on the farm with Jonathan, slowly raised her head. The middle-aged woman frowned slightly. "Jonathan, it seems that a guest is coming." "Not far away." Jonathan, holding a pitchfork, looked at the off-road vehicle in front of his house and frowned slightly at the logo on the front of the vehicle. It seems that only the Luther family can afford to drive such a car. Could it be that Clark's classmates are looking for Clark again? Although Clark is not at home now, Jonathan doesn't like the interaction between Gino and Clark. However, when the car door opened, Clark wearing khaki jeans appeared in the field of vision of the Jonathans, which immediately made the Jonathans open their mouths. "Clark?" Jonathan was surprised, put down his work and ran to Clark. "Where did you get your car?" Jonathan stretched out his hand to wipe away the ominous premonition in his heart. When he got closer and looked at the textured lines of the red off-road vehicle and the brand new but mud-stained tires, Jonathan clearly, it might take him 100 years of farming to afford this car. Clark? Martha was worried about the quarrel between father and son, so she rushed to them. The three of them stood on the grass of the farm. Clark felt a little embarrassed and rubbed his hair. His eyes wandered and he said, "Well, a friend lent it to me." "Clark?" Jonathan frowned and stared at Clark. He watched the child grow up with his own eyes. Jonathan could tell at a glance that Clark was lying. He lowered his voice and said, "I want to hear the truth." Seeing that he couldn't hide it, Clark had no choice but to put down the arm that was scratching his hair, took a deep breath, and stared into Jonathan's eyes. "Okay, this car is a gift from Gino." Sure enough. Jonathan sighed in his heart, and his suspicion in his heart came true. Martha raised her eyebrows and asked with a smile, "Is it because you saved Lex Luthor's life that his brother gave you this big guy?" "That's right." Clark said to Martha excitedly, "Mom, the performance of this car is very superior. Our family needs this car. It can help us transport goods and reduce the financial burden on the family." "It? Clark?" Before Clark could finish speaking, Jonathan immediately interrupted Clark. The middle-aged man frowned and said seriously, "I know you want this car very much, but you can't accept it." "But this is their thank you gift." Clark frowned, "It's just a car, Dad." Clark didn't know why his father was so stubborn. It's something that both parties want to do, but Jonathan wants to stop it. "Because you saved his life, you can accept his thank you gift with peace of mind." Jonathan crossed his arms and looked serious. "What about next time?" "Clark, what if you save someone else's life next time, but they don't? What if I didn't give you something in return? What would you think?" "That's not what I had in mind." Clark pursed his lips. "But human nature is like this." Jonathan stared at Clark. "You can't guarantee whether your emotions will be affected. Kindness should not be sought in return, Clark. But it's just a piece of cake for the Luthor family." "Father." Clark couldn't understand Jonathan's thinking. He argued rationally, "Do you know what Gino is wearing? The clothes he is wearing don't even have brands, they are all custom fit. He is handsome and rich. I can guarantee that 99% of the girls in school like him. The other party just sent a car, which is not expensive to the Luthor family. It is even like sending a water glass." Looking at the emotional Clark, Jonathan sighed, but still insisted on his bottom line. He slowly shook his head and said, "I'm sorry, Clark. I know you are unhappy. This is normal. After all, children of your age want to there's a car." Listening to Jonathan's words, Clark took a deep breath, stared at his father and said, "So I can't accept this gift, right?" Jonathan did not back down and nodded, "I'm afraid that's the case." "Okay, then I'll smash it." Clark threw away the school bag behind him and appeared in front of the off-road vehicle in an instant. He raised his fist and imitated Kino's behavior in the morning and punched the hood of the off-road vehicle. "Stop it, Clark!" Jonathan was shocked and hurriedly stepped forward to stop Clark's reckless behavior. But how could Jonathan's speed compare to the speed of the son of Krypton? Before Jonathan could take a few steps, Clark's fist landed on the hood. Bang! The fist hit the iron sheet with strong wind, and the terrifying force made the hood make a tooth-breaking sound. The originally flat front of the car was dented to a degree visible to the naked eye, with the fist imprinted on the iron sheet. The originally beautiful front of the car was twisted and convex as if it had been in a car accident. "Clark?" Martha was also frightened by Clark's actions. She shouted to Clark in panic, "Child, don't do this." Whoosh! It seemed that some parts in the car were damaged, and some black smoke floated out from the hood and into the air. "Who?" After venting his anger a little, Clark found some peace in his originally angry heart, but when he saw the worried eyes of his parents, Clark couldn't help but loosen his fists. "I refused Kino at first, but he said that if I didn't want it, he would throw it away." Clark glanced at Jonathan angrily, "So I fulfilled your wish, father." After saying this, Clark turned around and ran towards the outside of the farm. Jonathan hesitated to speak. Clark ignored the shouts behind him and ran faster. Now he just wants to be quiet. Chapter 20 Dinner with Clark. Luthor Castle. Pa bang bang. The crisp sound echoed in the castle hall. Two figures wearing visors and holding rapiers kept trying to attack. The rapiers in their hands were waving, intertwined, and collided with each other, making crisp sounds. The sound of steel clashing echoed through the hall. The tall figure on the right moved swiftly and fiercely, and the other petite figure was forced to defend with a sword as it was pressed forward by a torrential attack. Master! The old butler was holding a tray in one hand and holding the other behind his back. He had impeccable manners and stood at the entrance of the hall with unheard steps. I'm sorry to disturb you, but there is a boy outside the castle who claims to be your high school classmate and wants to see you. High school classmates? A dull voice came from under the visor, what's your name? As he spoke, the tall figure turned his head to avoid the sharp sword stabbed at the throat by the petite figure, swung the sword away with his backhand, and once again entered the fierce battle. The old butler said calmly, the other party calls himself Clark Kent. Gino was a little distracted and murmured, Clark? This is a rare visitor. However, in fencing, any tiny mistake can be fatal. Ha! The petite figure obviously seized this opportunity. She gave a low shout, and with her right hand holding the sword, she suddenly used force to swing away the long sword that was pressing on the sword. Then she pointed the long sword at Gino's throat with a typical thrusting movement. The situation changes rapidly, and the outcome is only a matter of millimeters. The game ended and Gino lost. Well, it's just over. Gino took off his visor, with an unconcerned expression on his face. He smiled and gave a thumbs up to his opponent, great progress, Annie. The figure opposite also took off his visor, revealing a delicate and pure face, with long hair on both sides wetted by sweat and sticking to his cheeks. Hearing Gino's praise, the little maid nodded reservedly and straightened her slender waist. The girl walked towards Gino and took over the sword and visor. Gino took the milk on the butler's tray, took a sip and said, let him in. Prepare the dinner by the way. Gino snapped his fingers, I want to treat this friend to a banquet. The old butler nodded, your wish, young master. The midday wind blew the green grass in front of Luther Castle, and green vines clung to the walls. Clark, who was waiting in front of the castle gate, stared blankly at the green vines on the wall. He didn't understand why things turned out like this. Not far away, an old man's calm voice interrupted Clark's thoughts, Mr. Clark, welcome to Luther Castle. Hello. Clark came back to his senses. The old butler opened the iron door and led Clark into the castle. Stepping on the cracked stone steps and walking along the road full of flowers on both sides, when Clark stepped into the main hall of the castle, looking at the luxurious furniture full of history around him, especially the heavy-looking expensive chandeliers above his head, he couldn't help but feel somewhat emotional. A voice sounded from behind Clark, introducing Clark, an old object from the 18th century, a collection of the ancestors of the Luther family. Gino patted Clark on the shoulder, and the system prompts were constantly playing in his mind. Negative emotions from Clark plus 50, plus 50. You seem to be in a bad mood. Gino led Clark to the long dining table. The maids pulled out the chairs and let Clark sit at the table opposite Gino. Is it so obvious? Clark rubbed his cheek, looking disappointed. Gino chuckled, you almost have the word I am unhappy written all over your face. But don't be sad, Clark. My father said that good food and beautiful people can relieve sadness. Although you can't enjoy the beauty, you can enjoy the delicious food. Gino said, then picked up a bottle of red wine on the table and handed it to Clark. This is a good friend. He takes the initiative to come to your door and give you points. Gino smiled and pointed to the red wine bottle in Clark's hand, you can blow on the bottle. Clark frowned and said, well, shouldn't you drink from a red wine glass? Isn't that how you rich people drink? Use a wine glass. Gino said with a disdainful smile on his face, don't listen to those guys' farts. Rich people can drink whatever they want. Clark raised the bottle and poured it into his mouth as if he understood. The slightly spicy smell of alcohol made Clark, who was exposed to alcohol for the first time, couldn't help but frown. At this time, the kitchen had prepared dishes, and several swaying blonde maids walked into the hall dignifiedly holding silver plates. Pieces of delicious food were placed in front of Gino and Clark. Gino picked up a fork and stuck it into a piece of meat. The red-orange soup flowed down the meat. Gino raised the fork and introduced to Clark, French pan-fried chicken. Dice onions and basil leaves, mix with diced matsutake and mushrooms, add cherry tomatoes to add texture and pour over the fried chicken breasts, then simmer over low heat for 10 minutes before serving. It's smooth and tender in the mouth, without losing the spiciness of onions. It's my favorite delicacy. Listening to Gino's introduction, Clark was also a little greedy. He swallowed, picked up the knife and fork on the table, picked up a piece and put it into his mouth. Clark chewed carefully, his dull eyes suddenly lit up, and he mumbled while chewing the meat, "It's delicious." While the two were eating delicious food, they would toast each other and taste red wine from time to time. As the saying goes, there are 3 ways to bring men closer together: carrying a gun together, drinking together, and. In short, as time went by, Clark drank the red wine in his stomach and gradually fermented. Even though he had an extraordinary physique, Clark felt a little bit drunk. Taking advantage of the strength of the wine, Clark put down the knife and fork in his hand and looked at the table in distress. Kino opposite. Kino, why do you think my parents can't understand me? Gino raised his eyebrows slightly, raised a smile on his lips, and asked tentatively. Is it because of Uncle Jonathan? He doesn't want you to accept gifts from the Luther family. Clark nodded, that's right. He rubbed his eyebrows, his eyes full of distress, it's like there is a huge gap between us. Gino smiled, put down his knife and fork as well, flicked his finger to instruct the maids to remove the desserts for dinner, stared at Clark and said, this is normal, Clark. Did you know? Gino sighed and said, when I showed powerful abilities when I was a child, my parents spent 4 years taking me to many mysterious places to explore the abnormalities in me. They thought I was possessed by some demon, but I'm more inclined to think it was a gift. Gino stared at Clark with burning eyes and said, it's a gift from God. Of course, because of the 4-year delay, I went to high school when I was supposed to go to college. The maids brought desserts. Gino picked up a macaron with his hand and threw it into his mouth. He stretched out a hand and shook it, expressing his thoughts to Clark. Sometimes, maybe you should communicate more with your father. I can tell he loves you. Just like my parents. Gino held his chin with his hands, with a smile in his eyes. But because he was too worried about you, his love put a lot of pressure on you. End of the chapter. Like and subscribe for more videos like this.